Hi, Gil. Great to see you and great to connect with you tonight.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having
Uh,
me.
yeah, and I really
Capricorn
thank you for
Radio.
your time. I know we had a little bit of planning to get this one organized. Here we are, Gil. We're going to be talking about Planet X. What is, there's almost like a hysteria out there, Gil, where people are looking for answers on this. People really are searching for the truth. We definitely have something there, Gil. There's something tangible to this whole thing. There's fragments of evidence, and I know we're going to get through a long presentation today, so I'm going to open the floor for that and just tell me how you first of all got into this research, and what we're going to start with the presentation today.
Well, I first started this research as a skeptic pertaining this about Planet X, and I decided to spend a little time. I had a little extra time to do some research into it
Mm-hmm.
to see if I could either disprove it or prove it. And most of the information I saw on the general web was they didn't have any actual data to back it up. It was based on circular reasoning, and that didn't fit well with me as far as it being a valid object or had any validity
Mm.
of being a threat to us. And so I decided to take a look at the Chinese records because they go back the furthest in time
Mm-hmm.
on documenting objects in our sky, and they have the most extensive records. And I came across this white paper, this report called the Reevaluation of the Supernova of 1054. It was produced by the Dublin Institute of Advanced Studies, and I'll show a frontal view of the paper itself in a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And and what that proved out is that the supernova came 2 or 3 months earlier, and that this object that they documented for 26 months uh, was actually an unknown NEO, a near-Earth object, a sizable object that was reported in the thing document as at one point it was as bright as Venus and as large as Jupiter.
Wow.
And they had other points, and that they had the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Korean astronomers documented it so well that I decided to take an attempt to plot its orbit.
Mm-hmm.
And to my surprise, it matched a biblical time frame of 150 days on a separation between its entry and exit. And the other startling point of this was that it was on Earth's planetary plane. Both of its legs, entry and exit, it crossed Earth's planetary plane twice.
Mm-hmm.
That is a oddity in itself, and since this was an unknown object, a sizable size, it piqued my interest,
Sure.
especially since it matched biblical uh, time period.
Mm-hmm.
In the
Wow.
book of Revelation, it mentions another time period of 5 months, which is the equivalent to 150 days as well. So I used that model, which the model we came up with was that it was closer to 360 year orbit, not a 3,600 year orbit. Um, and we used that, and I went back to the biblical records to see what other time periods that it may have been documented in,
Mm-hmm.
and I found 14 of them,
Wow.
14 periods of times, and five secular. It brings us to the present, where there's a high probability that it may pass back around here in year 2016 or 17. And that's what brought me out of
Mm-hmm.
being a skeptic into because now we have data to back up that there has been a large object that has passed through our
This is the
solar
thing.
system.
This is the thing, Gil, that has my attention too, because there's definitely data. There's definitely data out there, and as people like yourself out there have taken this research really into the forefront. There's a lot of data out there that people can easily get their hands on. Like you say, the Chinese records, they were mapping astronomy and supernovas and all sorts of material going back thousands of years. They're the only civilization to be permanently in existence for 5,000 years. All the rest have either come and gone. But great that the Chinese records are there to do this research. I'll open the floor, I guess, if you want to start with the presentation. I'll let you just. I'm going to kill the video, Bill, and what we'll do then is we'll hand it over to you.
All right. Do you hear me clearly? Because I'm hearing you kind of garbled.
Yeah, no, I'm
loud.
We're loud and clear, Gil. You're coming in loud and clear.
Okay, because the internet on this side is a little bit slow here.
Okay, well, it's going to be a lot better with the video now. So, anytime you're ready, we can go with the presentation. I'm going to strap in for this one, Gil. I'm not going to bother you too much. I'll just maybe pass the odd comment, but I'm going to give you the floor space to get through this.
All right, I'm going to give you my basic presentation when I've given this to audience. Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah, looks loud and clear. Planet 7X timeline of events.
All right. This is the timeline that I've come up with my research, where it's passed in our past history here. And there's 14 biblical events all the way up to Yeshua's sacrifice. And then we have 5 or 6 secular events. Whenever we get to the dark ages, data is extremely kind of mysteriously is missing. Only thing we have is some wood carvings and paintings. But according to the science paper that I'm reading on, it says that it appears as if the religious authorities at the time, which was basically the government, did censoring of this object. And keep in mind, the scientists at this time were looking for the evidence of a supernova. They didn't know that it was an NEO at the time. So what we'll do right here is we'll show the relationship with Noah's flood. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, this is Noah's flood. It mentions in Genesis that the floods started, and it took 40 days and 40 nights for it to rain. Then 150 days later is when the water started to recede, and that a great wind passed over the water that caused. Then he saw the water receding. Well, that great wind, when I was looking at this, that possibly Earth traveled through 2 debris fields. One that broke the canopy of water in the first one, and the second one, a large meteor hit the Earth that removed 71% of our top crust. And the meteor crater that was caused by the meteor was the Gulf of Mexico. Let me show you this example here on how this may have happened. We had a canopy of water. Remember, the Bible talks about right here, this is where a lot of people ask me a question, especially when I say the 71% of the crust. You see how I showed that there's extra crust right here? You can see how Pangea is held tightly. Held tightly together. Okay. The meteor shower ruptured the canopy of water, causing the Earth to be flooded. Then we had a large impact here that caused the Gulf of Mexico, knocking off 71% of our crust. That caused a debris field around Earth that later coalesced it into a moon. You can see right here in this drawing how Pangea had fit together here.
Clearly.
And roughly roughly 300 to 400 years later is what it took for a moon to coalesce into a moon as we see it today. The moon is equal to the volume of the missing crust. Now,
Wow.
this is also the volume of our oceans. You see?
Mm.
So, if you look at this a little bit closer and you dissect the Earth and you show how it hit and it causes a pressure wave, and part of the pressure wave will push the core upward, and the other one, the pressure wave will bounce off and come at an angle. You see this white mark right here? That's the Himalayas.
Wow.
See this purple? This purple right here is
Mhm.
the pressure wave. Well, let's see if we have any data to that. And let me show you the Gulf of Mexico first.
Gotcha.
You see how we have
Perfect.
how
Wow.
Africa came right off the shelf here?
Gotcha. Snugly fits in.
Okay.
It's quite snug.
Yep. You see how Cuba fits in here? They had a string of lakes where it caused it to break away.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then you see how the Yucatan,
Got a big hole
well,
in the middle of it.
right.
Wow.
You see this, how it split right in here?
Mm-hmm.
There's a natural split that took place.
Yeah, you can see it.
And whenever you bring back the Yucatan, and I can prove that this is the original spot for it in one of the other slides. But take a note right here. You see how there's a lake that's cut in half
Mm-hmm.
in Florida?
Yep.
A large crater has one of the characteristics of a large crater is a double rim. There's a rim where the edge of Florida is here. There's a rim on the outskirts in the Gulf of Mexico. And this outer rim goes right underneath half of our state. And it meets right where Toledo Bend Dam is, because that's the edge of the crater. And it goes north of Houston and everything. Let me show you a little bit more here. This is how large the crater would have been. Because this happened at the time the Earth was flooded, the crater is not as pronounced because that wall of water would have helped compress the rim down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay? And we can tell the size of the meteor that it took to make this hole. Keep in mind the Gulf of Mexico is its average depth is greater than the average depth of the Atlantic Ocean. Okay? And the meteor size for 1,100-mile wide crater would be roughly 110 miles across. I don't have the stats to break that down in kilometers for your listeners, but they can do the math there.
Well, I'm still in the UK. We're still on the miles as well. We're refusing to go to kilometers, Gil.
Oh, okay. All right, good.
Yeah.
Now, take a look at this mountain range that goes below here. You see how it follows the curve?
Oh, yeah. It's like a double
The mountain,
rim. You can see
mountain range?
Yeah.
Yes, yes. There's definitely some characteristics, and there's one of the things that's stopping the scientists from believing that that's a crater, but I'll get to that later. Now we're going to talk about the Himalayas, okay? You can see the curved shape of it. It has a semicircle shape. And what I'm saying is this is created in seconds, not thousands of years. You see, this is a gravity map from NASA right here. Okay, you're slightly heavier in Asia than any other spot on the Earth. And they can't figure out why. You see how this circular reddish area is? Then it goes across the Himalayas right in here.
Wow.
Well, that's where the pressure wave hit from underneath. The reason why you're heavier there is because it compacted the matter. The crust was compacted from underneath.
Oh, yeah. It's like a reverse impact. A reverse impact.
Yeah, you have denser matter. You have your gravity is greater, and it's happened to push up the Himalayas where the crust was the weakest, and it came in a semicircle. And now we know why we're heavier here, and this purple this reddish mark right here matches the pressure wave that I showed you earlier, as far as the
Diameter.
match. Now, this also helps explain some of the anomalies we have on Earth throughout the Earth. One of them, you may recognize this as this Ayers Rock in Australia.
I was going to ask.
You can see the
towns.
towns. Yeah, you can see the towns here, right here.
Oh yeah.
This is how. See these scars on there? You can see that it had a rough ride. Let's say, it's scarred with longitudinal marks.
Yeah, very long striations.
Right. Well, I have a theory that this is called I think it's a monolith, they call it. This is the second largest in Australia. And this is a puzzle because it's not native to the area. It landed here very softly. It didn't come from outer space because it's not burnt. So it didn't re-enter the atmosphere.
Wow.
And it didn't land with any force.
Wow.
It had a soft landing. Otherwise, there'd be a crater here.
Yeah.
So that's what's the mystery is right here. How did it get there?
There's no tektites, there's no nuclear heating from the friction of the atmosphere, and there's no impact.
Correct.
Wow.
Well, I have an idea that it came at a very slight angle from where the Himalayas were pushed up, that this rock was tossed from the Himalayas when Australia was closer to the continent of India. And that it came at an angle, just like you throw a rock on top of a lake and you skip it, and then it finally loses energy and just lands softly.
Gotcha.
Well, you see these marks right here? That's about 13 miles away, right here. That it landed prior to the where it's at today. So if we put Ayers Rock right here, take a look at this. Tell me if we have a possible match on the skids, on the skid marks.
Wow.
And that it landed here, and this is where it lost most of its energy. It flipped a couple of times and landed softly. That's why we don't have a crater. So Ayers Rock originally came from the Himalayas.
Amazing.
This is the direction that the skid marks, and Mr. Australia was closer to India. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the moon here, just to prove out this one, because this is the basis. If we can prove this out here, then that tells us that this. I'm going to show you a logic triangle at the end of this that is very hard to beat. This is the moon, and you see all this dark area? These are canyons. Yeah, these are canyons. These are not craters. These are canyons. And let me show you the size of them, okay? This is where, debris did not fill in when it was forming.
Gotcha.
So here's the U.S., roughly 2,000 miles across. If we place this is the Grand Canyon, this little blue mark right in here. And if we compare the Grand Canyon against the moon canyons, you can see, remember, the moon is, this is scaled to size. Yeah. The moon is only about a quarter of the diameter of Earth. You can see how large these craters are. I mean, these canyons. This is where material did not fill in. Now, this side always faces the Earth because it's heavy in iron, and it points to us like a compass needle.
Yeah, it's locked in there, yeah.
Right. Now, the back side of the moon has 4 times more craters than the side facing us. At some given point in its past, it's actually protected Earth from additional meteor showers. These are not random, but this is meteor showers that it's actually protected. It ran interference for us when Earth went through the tail, and I believe I know one of the cases that it passed.
Wow.
Now, this is a drawing. I think it came from NASA or someone. It shows how the Earth is the moon is pieced together, very large pieces.
Mm.
just like it would have
Just-
coalesced when it came off of the Earth.
Mm.
Okay.
Wow.
Let me run a little video real quickly for you to see what I'm saying here. This is something that I made here. This is the meteor coming in,
See it now, yeah.
next to the Gulf of Mexico. This is the pressure wave,
Gotcha.
and it's snapping the crust in not in one piece, but it was in multiple pieces.
Yeah. Scattering
And
it.
then, but this happened when the Earth was flooded. That's the only thing I can't show.
Yeah.
And part of this meteor was probably sticking out still in space.
Incredible.
Between the flooding of the Earth and this impact is what destroyed most of the dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why the Earth is cracked like an egg.
Yeah, there's fractures. I know. I've always wondered about the fractures, like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge in the off the west coast of Ireland here, where I'm at, and it's just there's a massive fracture that runs down right through the Atlantic, North Atlantic and South Atlantic.
Right here, this one, right
Yep,
in there.
That's the one, yeah.
Yep. And the only way that the Earth is fractured at this amount, remember, if we had Pangea, remember, if Earth is molten, why would all the continental crust bunch up if Earth is spinning and it's molten? If it's spinning and molten, it would have spread evenly across the surface. So Pangea was formed because it was landlocked by the other land. You only had seas and lakes. You didn't have oceans yet. And this is to give you, for instance, on size of craters. This is Meteor Crater.
In Arizona, yeah.
That's that dot. Yeah, you see that dot in that picture right there? That's Meteor
Wow.
Crater. That's a mile across.
Wow, it's tiny.
This one right here is called the Chesapeake Bay Crater. It's 53 miles across. Then the Chicxulub Crater, which is on the Yucatan Peninsula, which they thought killed the dinosaurs. That's the large one in this circle right here.
Wow.
Well, if we look at how large this is, it's a dot right here, this yellow circle.
That's
It's
the
only
Yucatan.
1/10 of the size of the large one right here.
Oh wow, so that's the
And
Yucatan.
Yeah, and a large crater has a double rim, and that's what we have here. We have a double rim.
Wow.
Now, this is where I want to show you some evidence. You see these cenotes, they call them. Cenotes is a
Well,
limestone.
yeah.
It's a limestone formation, a cave-like object. It's when the meteor hits, it liquefies the limestone like into a mud type of consistency. The water turns to steam, and then you get a steam bubble that comes up, making a perfectly round opening. Okay, a circular opening. That's all of these blue dots, or
Cenotes.
right.
Wow.
Now they said this area right here that I'm marking out is evidence for the Yucatan impact that supposedly killed the dinosaurs. Okay, this one. Well, my question is, what made these larger ones right here? See how wide that rim is compared to how narrow this one is?
It's like a field.
Right.
A field.
If you bend the Yucatan back down, like I was showing you earlier, that it went downward, then this lines up with the crater rim that I'm showing. This one is the Gulf of Mexico's cenotes.
So you actually have the cenote rim on top of the other cenote rim. Basically, you have the two rims.
There was a study did by the Smithsonian with an international team of scientists, Germany, the Netherlands, France, I believe, and the lady who was the head of it. And they went 1 year all the way around the Gulf of Mexico and all around the Yucatan, taking soil samples and studying it, and they prove without a doubt that this meteor impact did not kill the dinosaurs, that it was much earlier, that there was a larger one that killed the dinosaurs. And that's an international study.
Mm.
Now, she came close to being fired for saying that because she went against the norm. Even though she had evidence to back her, I mean, this international team agreed with this,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not willing to go along with that because that breaks the norm. And this is, I want to show you the edge of that crater. It goes right around here. This is where most of the natural gas and oil fields are here off of the coast of Louisiana and Texas.
Yeah.
Yep. Here's Houston area. Well, all of this region right here is sliding to the south right now because it's on this is all Mississippi silt. And it's sitting on a 45-degree rock ledge, which is the crater rim.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sliding on that 45-degree rim south and downward. We're losing our elevation.
Mm.
Yes. All our coastlines around here are eroding, and it's not from global warming. It's because our elevation is shifting. We're sliding. In the deeper water, these deep water rigs, what's called the +10, where the boat will dock up to a offshore platform to let people off, it's usually 10 foot above water. Well, they ended up being below water after X amount of years. They had to cut them off and raise them because this area is sliding deeper into the Gulf.
Amazing.
Now I wanted to show you this logic triangle here. This is kind of hard to beat. I haven't found anyone. One of the things that the scientists have a problem with is accepting the Gulf of Mexico as a crater, as an impact site, is that a large meteor impact creates two levels of heat. One is from the blast, and another one, it generates a frequency that violently vibrates carbon molecules to the point where they spontaneously combust. And you'd have a ring of fire that would go all the way around the Earth, all the way to, and you have a burnt out cinder.
Your skies would glow. Yeah, basically everything would just, wow.
Yeah, you'd have all plant life, animal life, and human life
Incinerated.
would spontaneously combust, right. So that's the problem they have with such a large impact.
Gotcha.
But as this gentleman had challenged me, I said, it sounds like we have a problem with heat. He says, yes. I said, water's a good absorber of heat. He says, yes. I said, would the volume of two oceans be enough to absorb that heat problem? And I said, because this impact happened when the Earth was flooded, not in the state that the Earth is today.
Yeah, we've probably lost another ocean.
Well, in other words, this large crater and life to exist cannot exist unless the Earth was flooded. And the moon cannot exist unless you have a large impact. And the water cannot recede unless you remove crust, which is the moon. You have a logic triangle, and then how does the people survive a flood unless they're on a boat, as well as the animals? This is a logic triangle you can't beat. You have a crater, you have the moon, and the only way that this crater can exist with life existing on Earth is if it's a flooded Earth, because you have a heat problem.
You got a circular checkpoint where it keeps feeding back to itself and it keeps checking in a rotation.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
These points they have to exist at the same time.
I like your methodical reasoning, Gil. I really do. I like the logic and the methodology, and it's obviously taken you quite a while to put this together. It took a while to generate this research.
Well, it took me 3.5 years of 14 to 16 hours a day to to generate all of it.
Wow.
But it was, you see, when we look at the moon, it's actual direct evidence that Noah's flood actually happened, and people don't know this. It's a visual reminder that's the only way that it could have happened for us to exist.
Mm.
To give you an example of some recent meteors, that asteroids that passed near Earth. This is one right here, recent. It's 2.4 miles. Halley's is about 9.9. This is LA here. All right.
Wow.
The one we're going to talk about later in the presentation is Comet Siding Springs. It was only about 2,300 feet or 700 meters across.
Mm-hmm.
This is a meteor in one of our museums over here. It's 15.6 tons.
Wow, sir.
It's an iron meteor.
Iron, you can see the iron, yeah.
Yeah, and that was put in the museum in 1902. Now, if you didn't have a word in your vocabulary for meteor, what would be a good description if you only had minerals and natural things around you to describe this? Does a word like wormwood come into reference?
Mm. It looks like wormwood. It looks like it just looks the only word to describe what that looks like. I actually have an old chest downstairs, so it's got wormwood in it, and it actually looks like that.
Yeah. So I have a picture of a person sitting right in this area, a full grown person. That's how big that.
Wow.
And yet the one that hit the Gulf of Mexico is 110 miles across.
Wow.
Now we'll move on to the Tower of Babel. If we look at the writings in the Talmud, and not all the Talmud's right, but we look for historical references that we can either validate. It says that a third part of it sank down into the ground, and a second third was burned down, and the remaining third was standing.
Mm.
Well, this is supposed to be a remember fiery brick, very hard brick thing. How does it catch on fire? Now, let's take a look at the area. This is Babylon. This is Saddam's palace right here. This Babylon is the mid kingdom of
Nebuchadnezzar.
Right, of Daniel's time.
Yeah.
But that's not the period of time that the Tower of Babel. That's the old kingdom we're looking at. That's the time of Nimrod. We need to look further south, right? Around here. Now, see what we have here? Now, take a look at the way they laid out the town right here. Exactly north and south, east and west, grid.
Yeah.
Look at this one. It's slightly out.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. But they knew what north and south was.
Oh, yeah.
So, if we take a closer look at this, it's 14 degrees out off of north. This is a moat that's around a zizzirat. The reason why you have a moat is because the base sank into the ground. The top is gone, and only the midsection is left.
Wow.
Just like the description in the Talmud.
The first, second, and third.
The top of this was burned because, remember, it's fired brick. The only way you could burn that is if you had fiery hail. This is where it is listed in the Talmud right here, in the yellow. And now we'll move on to the next one. Now, keep in mind the Tower of Babel, which is in Babylon right here. Let's see if I have a picture of it. No, I don't. The Tower of Babel and Solomon and Mr. Gomorrah, Mr. Destruction, which is in a different area. It's near the Dead Sea.
Dead Sea, yeah.
This happened. This happened in the same year. Abraham had already left and went to the Dead Sea area. Now, we have some interesting points right here. Remember that meteor that went over Russia?
Oh yeah, crazy. I mean, the fact it was caught on camera with all the dash cams was insane.
Yeah. Well, let's take a look at some of the stats here. It was 20 to 30 times more energy than the bomb dropped on Miss Hiroshima. It damaged 7,200 buildings in 6 cities surrounding it. Injured, I think, somewhere like 1,500 people. If this object would have exploded closer to the cities, you'd have people vaporized. But it exploded high enough to where they only had the shock wave.
Shockwave, the after effect.
About 50% of all meteors explode before they reach the ground. So let's take a look at now Lot's wife. Remember, she was told not to look back. You see this picture to the left here? This is the picture from Nagasaki when people were vaporized. Here's a man's ladder. It was vaporized. He was standing by it. He had his tool in his hand, and he was vaporized. This is the only thing left is just shadow.
Wow.
The picture to the right shows a man that was seated on a step, and he was vaporized.
Wow.
You can still see these things today, I believe. Now, remember the story of Sodom and Gomorrah? There was 2 cities.
Twin Cities, yeah.
Now, remember that the angels were held back from doing their destruction until Lot and his wife were in a place of safety. She was behind the rock or behind a wall. When she heard the first explosion, she came back around because she was, I guess, more or less in love with her material goods, her home and everything. So she came back to see if her home was destroyed. Then the second blast hit, and it vaporized her, and it left a shadow on the rocks. It's man's description when they went back. How would you describe a shadow of a person on a rock if you didn't have the word vaporization in your dictionary or in your vocabulary to use? The best description they would say she was turned to a pillar of rock or salt, because this area is salt because it's near the Dead Sea area. So that's, to me, gives a pretty clear one of the examples of this. Now, they had a gentleman that challenged me that Russia was covering up, that there was an EMP wave that was emitted, that Russia was suffering under a electrical failure because of that. And I told the gentleman, I said, meteors don't make sends out electrons like in a nuclear blast. I said there should be a EMP wave. And yet he was adamant about it. He was in the military of some form. And I said, well, next time I'll have a slide that represents this. This first slide shows it where it's about just started to explode. This is where it was at its peak on the second slide. Now, EMP would travel at the speed of light. Now, if you look at the third slide, it's finished. These lights on the cars are still on, as well as the camera that's showing this is still on.
It's true, the camera itself, yeah.
So there is no EMP wave, otherwise we wouldn't have all this camera data from cars, or the cars wouldn't even be working or driving. You can see that some of the cars are driving while they're showing this.
Sure, totally. Agreed.
So meteors do not create EMP waves. So I think this fairly explains the 2 events between the Tower of Babel and Lot's wife here. Keep in mind that God is in the timing. Remember, they had warnings ahead of time to be able to get out of there. Who else can warn you that a meteor is going to hit this exact spot? That would be a little difficult to do in the human in human terms. The next we'll talk about Joseph of Egypt. The moon, this is when the moon in the biblical or in the Hebrew is first mentioned. It was the dream that Joseph had when he was 16. That was in Genesis 37:9. Remember how he said he had a dream that it was 11 stars and a moon and a sun that bowed to him? Well, straight off the bat, I have a problem with the way that's worded. He said sun and stars. You can't see the stars with the sun out.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where he says it, the sun. I believe in ancient Hebrew, I come across this a few times. The word would have meant illuminated object, and because the stars and moon is already mentioned, the interpreter is assuming that the other object is a sun, when it could be our planet. Just food for thought, that illuminated object could be either the planet X, or our sun. And I'm going to prove to you that it's actually our planet.
Wow.
Oh, I have to go back one. I'm having problems here. It's not functioning right here for some reason. Jesus, I can't go back here. Okay, now it's working.
Never a sky disc thing anyway.
Yeah, okay. I wanted to point out also, remember Joseph, later he was age 40. He was the second in command. There was 7 years of plenty of food, and there was 7 years of drought. Well, this is one of the hallmarks of our planet. You get 3.5-year drought coming in, and then once it rounds the sun, you have 3.5-year drought as it's leaving. Okay? So how do we prove that our planet came at this time frame? Well, you may have heard about this. This is the sky disk of Nibiru, found in Germany. It's the oldest artifact that shows the constellation of the night sky in Europe.
Fascinating object. Copper and gold, I believe.
Yeah, I believe it's bronze and gold leaf on it. And when I read the official report on this object in the museum, I didn't agree with their findings of the experts, because they never mention that the moon is facing the wrong direction, for one.
Sure.
The illuminated side of the moon has to be facing the sun. You go to the next one right here, okay? So I can understand why the fabricator did this, is because he didn't have enough room, okay, to be able to put it the other way. But they didn't mention it. So they were looking for, I think, a 4-day-old moon when they should have been looking for a 22-day-old moon. Because depending on the way the moon is facing, tells you how, in what cycle that it's in. So they were looking at the wrong phase of the moon to start out with. 2, they said that this was a normal eclipse. Well, a normal eclipse of the sun is done by a full moon, not a crescent moon.
Wow.
And the moon would be over the sun, as it's shown here. It's shown to the right of it. The moon is not involved with this eclipse. That's the reason why they're documenting this. And I also didn't agree. I think this lower banana-shaped object in the bottom right here, they had
even stated this as being the boat or something. They said something like
yes, from Egypt. That they and I disagree with that
I hope
because
I don't need that.
yes, what this is I believe it to be the Mr. Horizon is in front of the viewer. If you take a look at this, this is the oldest Mr. Observatory in Europe. It's in Gossig, Germany.
Cossack Circle, I've been there about 2 months ago, believe it or not, Gil.
Wow, we should
Yeah.
have had this before. You would
I
have been
know if I
you had
if
been stepping in the steps of the people who saw this first.
it's
You'd
funny
been
because I
in
had
their steps.
and I have researched the Nebra sky disk. I mean, it's dated to the time that we're talking about. It's the real deal. The patina that's on the Nebra sky disk is so heavy and so
Yes,
crustacean.
it's real.
It's
Yeah.
the real deal.
It was actually the metal was tested and that it was actually mined in Europe. So it didn't come from Egypt. It was mined there in Europe and it always stayed in Europe. It was found in a colony about 20 miles southwest of this location called the Nibiru settlement.
Mm-hmm.
But I believe it was made at this observatory
Mm-hmm.
because of this reason right here. You see this area right here where I have in red. This
Mm-hmm.
is the old river, which
Ah,
is in front of the observatory. Remember, we're 24 degrees off here from where they would have been looking south. The river was changed because they put a dam in here and they tied it into it, but they closed off the old one.
gotcha.
So this is the view that's in front of the Nibiru disk right here, which is the riverbed.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the fine marks on the original, you see that that's the only one that they marked with flowing water. They put marks there to represent water. They put other little marks to represent the bank of the river.
Mm-hmm.
These other ones don't have that because it's the north and west. It's your horizon.
The horizons, yeah.
Well, one of the things that I found that they misinterpreted was this constellation right here. They had a different name for it when it's actually Monsieur Orion. And this is Capricorn and this is Gemini, okay? Well,
Mm-hmm.
that gives you the month of, I believe, April. From the latitude of Germany, you cannot see the constellation of Monsieur Orion in April
That's right, yeah.
unless the Earth is tilted. You see this red line right here? This is the Monsieur Horizon of Gossig, Germany, right here. Okay,
Sure.
you can't see the constellation Monsieur Orion. It's below the Monsieur Horizon. Only if you go to Luxor, Egypt, at that latitude, longitude or whatever, you can see the constellation.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
that is 26 to 28 degree tilt. You see how the moon right here is a
Mm-hmm.
crescent shape?
Mm-hmm.
You see the arrangement of the planets exactly the way it shows on the disk. You have Capricorn here, you have Gemini here,
Mm-hmm.
and so on. This matches perfectly with the crescent. You had to have a third object that caused the eclipse for you to be able to see the stars.
Wow.
Now, that was, according to the software, that's April 6, 1810 BCE. Now, the date that they gave was, I think, outside the Bronze Age.
I think they gave
But they were
1600.
looking at the wrong time. Yeah, they were looking, they had misidentified some things on here. So, one thing the software does not compensate for. Remember in Hezekiah, when the shadow went backwards, it was documented worldwide that the calendars changed from 360 days to 365 and a quarter days.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have to compensate on the software. Software, astronomy software does not
Do that
change. They go with 365 and a quarter days.
all the way. Yeah, they don't. Yeah, the
So,
software. Most of the software is only geared up for, astronomy in the future. If you want to do your
sure.
astrolabs and plan your modern astronomy, but it's not usually used, although a lot of us guys still use it for looking back in the past. It's not what it's really designed for, but so.
As long as you look in the past and you have to compensate for certain variables, certain things that they think are constants are not, and I can prove that. We have to subtract from the time of Hezekiah, which 700 BC, to now. You'd have to subtract 16 years from this date to come to the actual date that this even happened, April 6, 1794. This is exactly mid of the drought of Joseph of Egypt. Remember Joseph's dream at 16, where he said, 11 stars, the sun and the moon bow to him. All right? I'm showing you that the earth tilted 26 to 28 degrees. So what would the view of a person on earth would appear like? It would appear as if the sky is bowing to him. But he's age 40 now. And this is the mid of the drought. Now we have a real event that occurred that from his dream at age 16. From Gothic Germany to the latitude of Luxor, Egypt, 26 degrees. Joseph was around Egypt over here, and that meant he would have tilted all the way down to the equator, giving the appearance to him the skies are bowing to him. Here's some Egyptian gods and goddess. You see how there's a disc with horns?
Yeah.
Well, let me take you back to this right here. Take a look at this right here. See, Taurus is right here?
Yeah.
And where's the disc at? The disc is in Taurus. The planet that we're talking about is in Taurus. That's what they were showing here. Well, this is in Taurus. See, this is rooted in most of the pagan gods of the world, is this object.
Yeah,
this is rooted in Baal. Yeah, this is rooted in Baal worship, Zeus, and Jupiter. Remember, Zeus threw lightning bolts that dissolved mountains. Well, there was a thread of truth to that I'll come back later on. Well, when the two planets get close enough to each other and they tilt, lightning jumps between the two planets. That's, some people say 2 to 3 kilometers wide, but there's evidence on the moon and other planets that it could be as wide as 80 miles across, the lightning bolts. And if they hit a mountain, plasma, whenever you take matter and insert more energy into matter, it turns into plasma. So a mountain could dissolve in front of you if it's hit with plasma. So there's a thread of truth to this Zeus myth, if you want to call it. They actually saw something in the past. And this answers the story of Joseph here, and how Earth tilted 26 to 28 degrees. They had a 3-hour eclipse. This is the first mentioning of the moon, and the skies actually bowed to him. The next one was the Exodus of Egypt.
The plagues, yeah.
This stayed a mystery for me for a very long, long time. I had difficulty explaining this one, and until finally it dawned on me what was happening here. Remember, there was 3 days of darkness. Remember, at Joseph of Egypt, I just said there was 3 hours of darkness there. Remember Yeshua, when he died when he was sacrificed, there was 3 hours of darkness there too. The reason why this was 3 days is because the object had a collision with the planet Ceres. Ceres after the destruction of the planet Ceres, it became the asteroid belt. Okay, so how do we know this?
Timeline.
If you take a look from Exodus to Joshua's long day, it's only 52 years. From Joshua to Job, only 131. From Job to King David, only 290. From King David to Hezekiah, 358. If you put this all together right here, this is what you get. When it was coming in, it plowed into Ceres. It slowed its forward speed to 1/20th of its normal orbital speed. When it came around, it gave 3 days of darkness for the Exodus. Mm-hmm. Not having enough speed to go into deep space, it came back early, only 52 years. It picked up more speed going around the sun and brought it further out. It brought it 131 years. Came back again. It took 4 times before it picked up its normal speed, and it was documented each time in the Bible when it showed up. So you have a progression of its orbit increasing as it gains speed.
It's exponentially trying to escape, but it's getting dragged.
Yeah, because it can only reach maximum speed according to its mass. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so it was under, the speed was under, so it had to take 4 times before it gained all of that speed that it needed. Just like we'd send a space probe, and we'd let it zip around Jupiter 4 or 5 times before sending it off, because it picked up speed.
Yeah,
right. And there's a maximum that it's able to achieve according to its mass. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what happened here. Now, we're going to talk now about Joshua's long day. Joshua's long day is an interesting one. Mm-hmm. He had an ally in the north that asked for help because there was a massive army that had amassed. They were going to wipe out the allies of Joshua. So God told him to go help him and that he would deliver the enemy into his hand. Joshua was outnumbered. He only had 30,000 men. The enemy was 300,000. He was outnumbered 10-1. They marched throughout the night to get there in time. Now, you can read this in the story. It says the camp and the enemy were frightened. There was fear in the camp before Joshua even got there. And the reason why was that because the sun is late getting up. It doesn't state this, but I can prove it in a model. Because Earth's rotation is starting to slow down. So the sun was late coming up by 2 or 3 hours. That gave the men started thinking that that's a bad omen. Okay? Mm. Joshua used that for his advantage. He came in charging, and the enemy started to run. So he's massacring the enemy, and then this meteor shower comes in, destroying only the enemy. Now, keep in mind, he has 30,000 men stretched out fighting. None of his men are being hit. And this is with swords. This is hand-to-hand combat. Only the enemy is being hit. Remember where I told you how the moon has protected us in the past? Mm-hmm. The moon was protecting Joshua at this time from the meteor shower. Only the enemy was being hit. Now, remember how he said, he did a forced march throughout the night, didn't rest, went straight into attack, fought 12 hours, and he asked for another 12 hours to fight. The day was extended by another 12 hours. Mm-hmm. So how does that happen? Let me show you a little video.
'Sure. 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 'Sure
A comet has three tails: the dust tail, a plasma tail, and the debris tail follows this loop.
Mm-hmm.
All right. This red line is the orbit of our planet, Planet 7X. The green line is the orbit of Earth going around the sun. The tail points opposite of the sun. Okay. Earth is entering into the plasma field. Now, this is the big debate. The astronomers say that the tail of a comet is ice particles, and that there's missing matter in the universe. There's 96% of all matter is missing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the physicists say that there's no missing matter, that the vacuum of space is not a true vacuum, that it's filled like a lake of plasma.
Mm-hmm.
And the plasma is the missing matter. Remember, the fourth state of matter is plasma. And that there's no missing matter. And that the tail of a comet is plasma, not ice particles. Well, watch this video. We're going to keep on going here.
Wow.
And
Fascinating.
I'm going to show you how it's possible for Earth's rotation to slow down by 12 hours. It will lose if you do it in 24 hours, you will lose about 4.5% of its rotation compounded hourly. As it's going deeper and deeper, it's compound where within 24 to 28 hours, Earth comes to a complete stop. It's like turning a rheostat or a dimmer switch. It slows down quite right on time, just slowly. Therefore, you don't have mile-high tidal waves. You may have coastal flooding, but you don't have mile-high tidal waves.
Sure.
This is what happened.
Sure.
This is going to happen again. People need to get a grip on how this is possible and how the astronomers are going to predict the wrong half of the Earth to be hit, because there's a 12-hour delay in the Earth's rotation, and it'll be the opposite side that is actually hit. So this is what caused, see, Earth is entering the debris field right here. And this is what caused the meteor shower that killed the enemy that Joshua was pursuing. So now we have a logical model, and this is the same Chinese overlay from our study. And this is the same overlay is producing all these models correctly.
Wow.
It says large hailstones from heaven fell upon him all the way to Asher, and they all died. The enemy of Joshua. It says the sun stood still and the moon, because the moon is caught up into the plasma as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it is possible for this to happen. The solar winds will go towards, and this is what causes the direction of the tail, is the solar winds.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's interesting, when this happens again, when we enter that plasma tail, you're going to see the northern lights and the southern lights come all the way down to the equator. And it'll be 4 to 5 times more intense on the colors. And it will howl like a trumpet when the aurora is all the way down to the equator, whenever we're going into the plasma field. This is the way it looks around Alaska area or Canada, northern Canada. But multiply the intensity times 10.
Wow. I was just looking at the Northern Lights earlier. We had them in the north of Ireland here, Gil, this year.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, down as far as the north of Donegal, up the very north of Ireland, which it's incredible to see it this far south.
Well, you're going to see it even go further.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, now this is to help you prove out what I'm saying here. Remember, I was saying that there's a dispute between two camps: the astronomy camp that says it's ice particles, and the plasma, and then the physicists that say it's plasma. Well, just recently, remember the two meteors I showed you? This meteor is Comet Siding Springs, and it passed by Mars. The physicists predicted, if they were right, that this would illuminate the aurora of Mars, and you'd see lightning jump between the two. And the astronomer said, no, it's just ice particles. It won't have any effect. Well, guess what happened? When Comet Siding Springs passed, it lit up the aurora of Mars, and lightning struck between the two, proving that the tail of a comet is plasma.
Mm-hmm.
There's other data that says that the meteor shower, or the fiery hail, happened between the second and the third hour. Well, when we do the calcs on this, at the speed that Earth travels in its normal orbit, with its entry angle that the Chinese gives us, it exactly starts the second hour and ends on the third. Not bad for ancient people that had no data on planetary orbital mechanics, you know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Remember in the Bible it says your doom comes within 1 hour? Well, this is, whenever you calculate, Earth travels 8.4 Earth diameters in 1 hour. When we put the correct angle in here, okay, it tells us the diameter of this object is somewhere between 6.5 and 7.5 times the diameter of Earth, because the debris field can't go beyond that.
Gotcha.
And there's plenty of area between the moon and between the Earth and the moon for this planet to pass in between, because gravity is the weaker force, not the major force. It's electromagnetic that is the major force.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Gravity has a limit, which is called the Roche limit, which is this gold circle you see around the planet. On Earth alone, it's 1.5 times this radius. And this is where you get geosynchronous orbit.
Gotcha.
To put a satellite. Gravity can't pull back the satellite.
Yeah, the inverse square law gives you the Roche limit, yeah.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, if the moon has 1/5 of the gravity of Earth, and Earth is 5 times greater gravity than the moon, why is the moon moving away from us by 1 inch a year?
It's never been explained, is it? There's so many anomalies with the moon, which is what I kind of think is so fascinating with your research here, Gail. It begs to be questioned and answered and explained more by the physicists, and they just don't know what the moon, where it came from. They have no idea why it's there, why it's losing its, eventually it's going to disappear from us. They say it controls our tides and everything else, but it is slipping, that's for sure.
There's people just picked up a calculator and did a little bit of math, and if the moon moves away at 1 inch a year, it wouldn't take long before the moon is touching the Earth. It's not hundreds of millions of years. It doesn't take that long. It has to be a fairly recently made moon.
Mm-hmm.
There's some things that math doesn't kind of breaks the mold of this,
Very interesting with the Roche limit there, though. Very, very interesting. You have plenty of room for that Planet X to come through there. Plenty of room.
Yep. Remember, the two planets tilted towards each other. It's like two bar magnets coming within close
proximity.
And then just remember, these things are moving at about 80,000 miles per hour.
Sure.
So they're not just, if it would be stationary, they would suck each other in, okay? But they're not, they're moving.
Yeah.
So the only thing they do is they attract to each other and they tilt 26, 28 degrees.
Yeah, because they can tilt on
And
their
then
axis.
and then
Yeah.
and then as it's moving away, it straightens back again, close to its original.
Mm.
And there's other texts you may have known. Mr. Emmanuel Veliskowski writes in
Oh
his
yeah,
book.
Velikovsky.
Well, there's some ancient documents that says that him and his men saw an object, some sort of object that was 50 times larger than the moon. And this picture I'm showing you is a representation of that, of 50 to 1.
Wow.
As it passed exactly halfway between the moon and Earth. This is going to happen again.
Mm.
So that explains logically, and we have a model that works of Joshua's long day. How he got 12 extra hours of daylight and how he got a meteor shower killing his enemy. Now we're going to talk about Job's trouble. Job's trouble happened around the same time as Ruth. Ruth was in Jerusalem and Job was around the Golan Heights. We can get that because his son lived near the Golan Heights, it says in the Bible. Well, if we read carefully what the first sentence says here, says, fire of Elohim fell from the heavens and burned up his sheep and his servants and consumed them. That means there was no bodies of the animals or him. Would a crater kind of explain that? Or if it vaporized them?
Incinerated, basically.
Totally okay. Now read the third messenger when he came. Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the house of their brother and the firstborn, and see, a great wind came from the wilderness and struck the four corners of the house, and it fell on the young men, and they are dead. The pressure wave from the explosion is the wind that knocked down the house. That consumed the servants and the animals. This is part of Job's trouble. Remember Ruth, there was a severe drought in the land, and that's why she came back to Mr. Jerusalem shortly after Job's trouble, okay? Remember, Naomi was a stranger. She wasn't picking with the other Hebrews. She had to pick a little bit of a distance away. Remember, Boaz was not picking in his own field. He was just watching. Well, that's a Sabbath year. In the Sabbath year, the fields are left for the poor to go and pick. The owner doesn't pick. So Boaz is just watching. Naomi is picking for her and her mother-in-law. The following year is a Jubilee, because only in a Jubilee can Naomi get her land back. So we know approximately when this happened. Now, King Saul and David. It states at the end of King Saul's reign that there was 3.5 years of drought. And in another book, it says that in Samuel, that David had 3 years of drought at the beginning of his reign. In Chronicles, it says Saul had 3 years of drought at the end of his. Well, if you read the book of Samuel, it gives you, they had 7 years total, of drought. So that gives you 3.5 and 3.5. This object came around exactly midway between the two events. And During Solomon's time is when the priests got corrupt, and they created the Star of David. This is the Star of David right here. Now, it wasn't created by David. It was created during the time of Solomon by the corrupt priests, pertaining to this event right here. That this star came exactly ushering in the kingship of David. Now, this is an interesting one. Jonah's warning to Nineveh. He says, in 40 days your doom comes, or your destruction comes. Try to do what Jonah did. Go to a town of 20 to 30,000 people, and don't create a miracle, because none is mentioned, and try to convince 20 or 30,000 people to repent. How did he do it?
Mm-hmm.
Is it maybe because they didn't have internet or TV, and that they were in tune with nature, and they saw that the crops were dying of a severe drought, and that they saw bird and fish dying, and the earth was quaking, and the seasons were off? They had record-breaking temperatures and seasonal changes, and the only thing that Jonah had to come there is point to the sky, because it could be clearly seen at 40 days. Because right here, if you look at this, he says, a wicked and adulterous generation seeking after a sign will have no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. Now, in the book of Jonah, it says, in 40 days, and Nineveh shall be destroyed. Well, when it crosses the earth path, the total time it takes before where it recrosses is 76 days. Well, look where Earth is right here at 40 days. Earth is right here.
Mm-hmm.
At 40 days, you can clearly see it. It's behind the sun. You can see it behind the sun.
Yep.
Only thing Jonah had to do was point to it. That's why he didn't have to commit not a single miracle.
Wow.
This is going to happen again, because the world is a wicked and adulterous generation. Most of the world will only have 40 days. This is when the government's going to tell the people that this object is not a comet, that it's an inbound planet. See, only the people that read the Bible understand it, will understand this warning way early enough. When we see it in December during Hanukkah, the Feast of Lights, it's called, that they will know that they need to go to Jerusalem, because that's the pivot point of the tilt. When Earth tilts again, if you're 90 degrees off the axis of its tilt, remember the axis of tilt is going to be around Jerusalem. If you're 90 degrees of that, that's the east coast of America. And you draw a circle around the globe that goes right through the middle of South America and Australia. You're looking at 300-mile-an-hour winds if you're on the open water. If you have some, mountains around your area, you may have 150-mile-an-hour winds.
Wow.
But a F4 tornado creates 300-mile-an-hour winds. Grass doesn't stay in the ground. 150-mile-an-hour winds is more like a hurricane at maximum speed, at gust. And trees don't stay in the ground.
That's for sure.
All right. So would you want to be 90 degrees from the pivot point? The answer is no. That's not counting the tidal waves involved with this when the Earth is shifting and tilting 28 degrees.
Wow.
So this is why Jonah is important. That's why he said, a wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. Remember, there's only 2 pages of Jonah. The other one was where he was eaten or swallowed by a whale. Okay? Well, remember he says, look look to the skies for a sign. Well, we're not looking for someone to be swallowed by a whale in the heavens.
Mm-hmm.
It's the 2nd page of Jonah that makes sense. Now we'll get to Hezekiah. This is when the shadow went backwards during Hezekiah's time.
Mm-hmm.
We have an error in the English. Okay, remember these 3. We had Jonah at Nineveh over here. We had Hezekiah, and we have the 185,000 enemy soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
which are parked right out. All 3 of these happened in the same time period.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now this is the error we have in the book of 2 Kings. In King James says, the shadow went down on a sundial. Well, in the Hebrew, the shadow is on steps, and it's a stair. It's the stairs that it went backwards on. There's a big difference between the 2. A sundial reads the sun from east to west. That meant the earth had to stop, reverse direction, stop again, pick up speed 4 or 5 times greater than when that, and regain the lost time and come back to where it was before, because there's no mention of lost time. All the oceans would have emptied out and covered the continents. That can't happen if it's an east to west motion.
True.
But if we take a model and say it steps and it's the shadow from a window, and we face it south, now exactly 10 steps gives us 26 to 28 degree tilt. Where did we hear that before? We have the same tilt. That's why it was a north to south tilt over Jerusalem. Now there's no delay in time. You don't have that 12-hour problem or anything like that. It had a tilt, the shadow went backwards, and it went back to its original position without a problem. So there was also a drought during the same time period. Let me see. 3 years and 6 months. Remember I told you it was 3.5 years coming in and 3.5 years as it was leaving.
Mm-hmm.
So exactly midway was 3.5 years right here. The book of James. It had a total drought of 7 years right here in the 2nd book of Kings. This is one of the hallmarks. Now, during this time globally, I think in 60 to 80 countries, all the calendars changed within about a year and a half of this, from a year and a half of this point in time right here. Calendars changed from 360-day year to 365.25 days. Because remember, Ceres is gone, and the magnetic field is no longer compressed as tight as it was. So it allowed Earth to be dragged outward just a hair.
Just a little bit.
Which is half of 1%. And that increased our year to 365.25 days.
Wowza. It's mind-blowing.
So this is the asteroid belt, and Ceres is right here in it. And this is a destroyed planet. The spacing of the planets are not random. There's a formula to it, and the formula tells us there should be a planet right where this debris field is. You can see where there's two more Mr. Debris fields,
Mm-hmm.
one behind Jupiter's orbit and one in front of Jupiter's orbit. This is either destroyed moons of Jupiter or destroyed moons of planet 7X when it either collided with Jupiter or something. But we got debris fields here. It's from something that is destroyed. And you can see how our planet passes through the debris fields, picking up debris. And that causes the meteor showers. Speaking of meteor showers, right outside of Jerusalem was 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. They died in one night. Their bodies were not consumed. Okay? Think of small meteors the size of bullets going through the men. Therefore, when the king woke up, all of his army was dead. Now, the Jewish writers say that it was by fire from heaven which took away their lives and did not consume them, their bodies, nor burn their clothes. So, ancient writings even says this. See, the word angel means messenger in Hebrew.
Messenger, yeah, I've heard this before.
This planet could, because it has movement, that is not stagnant, it can be considered a messenger of God destroying their enemy. It falls within the text of that time. They didn't have a word for planet. It was luminaries, is what they called them. Now this is Haggai's warning. This is when the Hebrews came back to the land and cleared off the foundation of the debris of this destruction of the first temple. They went back to their normal lives and they built the wall of Jerusalem. They built their fancy houses, but they never built the Almighty's temple. Well, he got angry and he sent Haggai. And Haggai said that that there was a drought on the land and on the mountains, and even on the livestock and all of the laborers. And he says, I am going to shake the heavens and the earth and the seas and the dry land, and I shall shake all the nations, the entire earth. Then in this one right here, I am shaking the heavens and the earth, and I shall overturn the thrones of the kings, and I shall destroy the mighty ones of the Gentiles' reign, and overturn the chariots and their riders. Excuse me.
Wow. So much reference. That's so much reference. That's indicative of something really.
Yeah. What else shakes the whole earth?
Exactly.
So, there's something else I wanted to say about this. Oh, to be able to date this time when it happened. He says that they will work through the Sabbath to be able to build his house, his temple. Well, we know it's not just a Sabbath day of the week. He's talking about a Sabbath year, as well as their Jubilee. He's telling them to work through it because they were too lazy to do it when they were supposed to do it. So I said, I wonder if I could figure out what year that this was. I looked for other historical reference points, and I came across Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was taking Tyre at this same time. Remember where he built that land bridge to reach Tyre? And if you read the accounts, it said fiery hail came out of the heavens
Mm-hmm.
because Tyre had a wall up that he couldn't breach. Fire came from out of heaven and hit the wall, taking down the wall so Alexander the Great could take Tyre. And his men thought the gods were for him because of what they saw. I said, well, there's a meteor shower. I said, then I read where the following year he took a town in Persia, and there was an eclipse, and it named the town. So I got on my software, and I found a 2-year error on where they place this happening at, because the software shows that it was a preemblem, just a shadowing of the moon. It didn't turn solid red. It wasn't a total eclipse. I think they only marked total eclipses in the old days.
Sure.
Okay. So I found the same 2-year error pertaining to the destruction of the Second Temple. So when I backed it up 2 years, guess what? I have a total eclipse during the time that he took that town in Persia. And it lines up with the Jubilee and the Sabbath year of the Hebrews. So now we have the lineup that this, just as it says, you shall work through your Sabbath year or Sabbaths. Because you can't build a temple on a weekend. You got to, it takes a lot longer than that.
Sure.
So he's talking about years.
Yeah.
So we can date this to 335 BCE was when it passed. Now, this is the one that people should be the most familiar with. This is Yeshua's sacrifice.
Oh, yeah.
Remember, there was 3 hours of darkness, and it says the moon and the sun was eclipsed. Well, we have a problem there. You cannot have a double eclipse in a normal state. It takes a new moon to make a solar eclipse. And a solar eclipse caused by the moon can only give you 7.3 minutes of darkness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay? But the text says there was 3 hours. Well, if you take a close look at this, a solar eclipse in a natural state only covers a small section of the earth with darkness. The text says the whole earth was darkened, as well as outside text that says the whole earth was darkened during this period. Rome was darkened during the same time as Jerusalem, as well as parts of Africa. All of that area of the known world was darkened. That can't happen from a lunar eclipse. Remember, it was Passover. The moon is on the opposite side of Earth. It takes a new moon to make a solar eclipse. This was a full moon.
Mm-hmm.
Only way you can have a double eclipse is if you have a larger object in between the sun and the earth. And this larger object will give you exactly 3 hours of darkness, as the calc shows us. The orbit of this object is coming this way. Earth is traveling this way. And the shadow lasts 3 hours, as the text says. Now you have the moon darkened and the sun darkened for 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And this is using an object 6.5 to 7 times the diameter of Earth. Again, the math works out. At this same time, just want to show you how what's called a mikrah. A mikrah in Hebrew means rehearsal. You may have heard it called feast, but that's a very poor misinterpretation.
Mm-hmm.
The actual word means like a dry rehearsal, a react. Okay. This mountain is Mount Moriah. This is the same peak that Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac. Remember the father sacrificing his son. Remember there was a lamb with his horns caught in the briars. Remember how Yeshua had briars? He was the lamb. He had briars on his head,
Mm-hmm.
just like the lamb did. And that the father was sacrificing his son here. It really happened. Now, half of this mountain was quarried later when they went to build the wall of Jerusalem. That's when this skull called right here, you can see the skull in the mountain showed up. Is after they quarried half of the mountain. Now it's called the Golgotha, hill of the skull. This is therefore, where he was sacrificed is in the exact spot where Abraham and Isaac was. Abraham and Isaac was performing a mikrah on the exact spot that X amount of 1,000 years later
Mm-hmm.
would become Yeshua sacrificed. On the exact spot. Remember when Yeshua was in front of Pilate? Pilate was trying to let him go. He says, look, I'm going to bring out this prisoner,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to choose which one leaves.
Yeah.
Well, this was a mikrah of a performance that the priests perform. They would take 2 goats, they look identical, and they would choose from this little pouch of either white stone or a black stone, which would tell them which goat to be sacrificed and which goat was to be let out of town freely, and he'd leave. Okay? The one to be sacrificed would have a red sash tied around his neck. Okay? Well, here is Yeshua and Pilate, and the other prisoner his name was Barabbas, right?
Yeah, Barabbas.
Yeah. You have to say it slower because it's 2 Hebrew words, not one. Bar Abba. Bar means son, and Abba means father. So Pilate knew Aramaic as well as Hebrew, and he saw the dilemma right here. He's saying, which do you wish to sacrifice? Son of the Father, which is Barabbas, or the one who calls himself Son of the Father, Yeshua? This was played out in the ceremony. Remember, Yeshua had the cloak of, was it Herod or one of them? The red cloak around his shoulders as he's marked as the sacrificial, it's a scapegoat, if you wish. That's where this word came from.
Mm-hmm.
It's from this ceremony here. The other, Barabbas, was let out of town free, just like the other goat was. So that's where this mikrah, I just showed you 2. Let me show you the third rehearsal pattern. When he was on the cross right there, the priests were in the fields gathering 50 omers. You stretch out your hand in the field and you gather the wheat or the grain, and then you tie it right there in the middle. That's an omer. Now, they didn't harvest it. They just tied them. They tied 50. 3 days later is when they came back and they harvested. They cut it, and they piled them. Well, at the time that Yeshua was on the cross, there's a great earthquake that came in and marked 50 graves were opened. 3.5 days later, when Yeshua rose, then the 50 in the graves got up and walked into town. This is the first fruit offering. This is the first of a small resurrection that he's bringing to the Father. This is the first fruit sampling, they call that. A small resurrection. He's showing us this is a sample to the Father on what he's going to do as a greater event later on. Fulfilling another Mekra. So 50 graves were opened up at the time right there. Now, during the time that the earthquake opened up the graves, it opened the ground in front of him. As the centurion speared him, his blood came out, the ground opened up, and the blood didn't touch the ground. It went to an underground chamber where Solomon prepared a chamber for a future date where the ark would be moved to when Jerusalem was going to be attacked. See, they didn't have an Ark of the Covenant in this second temple. It was hidden during the destruction of the first temple. And was hidden in a cave that Solomon built. That cave is exactly underneath that spot. The blood is his blood, because the priest used to sprinkle lamb's blood on the ark. Now it's the real blood that's being sprinkled onto the ark, fulfilling the fourth Mekra. Remember the change in the calendar at Hezekiah?
Yep.
In Hebrew, there's no such word as accident. The Father changed the calendar so Hezekiah and Isaiah could create a lunar calendar then. There was no lunar calendar before that. Didn't need it. It was 30-day months. And they would start their year according to the equinox, because you needed ripe barley to make the matzah for Passover. You can't use old grain. So now they have established a lunar calendar. The reason why they needed this is because for us to figure out during the sacrifice that the moon was not involved with the eclipse. The Father planned for the moon to be on the opposite side of Earth, purposely showing us that there's a third object there. If he would not have done that, we would never figure this out.
Amazing.
And this is not an accident.
Totally mind-blowing, Gil. Totally mind-blowing.
So, remember the centurion, the higher one of the generals or whatever? Remember how he fell to his knees and said, truly that he is the Son of God.
Gil, we're going to take a little break at that, yeah?
All right, so you have to ask the question, how do you get a hardened Roman soldier that's seen very severe battles and it can fall to his knees and say, truly he is the Son of God, unless he's seeing something that really is outstanding, that made a mark on him. And this would do it. Now, in year 312, it's been documented. Remember Constantine saw a cross in the sky?
Yeah, I've heard this before now.
Yep, at the Battle of Mienville Bridge. It was documented in October. they're not sure when he saw the sign. They say it could be either 2 or 3 months before or after. But um, but he didn't have a cross at the time. Okay, his symbol was let's see, this emblem right here. It's an X with a P, and that what's interesting is Constantine wasn't converted as people say he was.
Sure.
The coins minted after this event, you see this other entity behind his face right here?
Oh yeah.
That's called, that's the sun god Mithra.
Mm.
He was a sun worshiper to the day he died. You can also see the sunbursts they have in these other. This also would happen whenever a comet is coming straight at you here at an angle. You'd see a star like a starburst as this object is coming into our inner solar system. He would see it. This fits the time, the time frame. This is called the old fiery dragon of old, you know. Now after this, around 707, is the collapse of the civilization of the Mayan and Aztecs.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of their population died of a severe drought. It was so severe that scientists speculate, or archaeologists speculate, about 90% of their population died. Now, what's interesting is if we take a closer look at their calendar, the outer ring of their calendar, if you take, remember this is carved in rock, doesn't that look like a comet right here?
It sure does.
If you pair these up as an entry and an exit, you have just about as many times as I've spotted in history. And the American Indians call this the blue Kachina and the red
Oh yeah.
Kachina.
Blue Kachina. I've heard this. Yeah.
The blue could be the plasma having a bluish color. The red could be meteorites or meteors coming in. So, you know, even though the age, you know, different cultures call it different things. Now, remember where they have a long count and a short count in the calendar that there was a lot of talk about?
Mm-hmm.
I found out that there's other counts that they're not telling us about, but I don't have access to these other counts. But if you take the last count, which was a Baktun, 394 years, and add it to the year that Constantine saw his object, was in 312, that gives you a year of 707, which is mid of the drought. Okay, so that meant 3.5 years earlier is when the drought started. Archaeologists date this massive drought starting around the 700s. It exactly adds up. I believe the Mayans this is an event calendar, and that they were documenting the time span between each event.
Mm.
And that's why you'd have multiple counts. And that's why the last count was between the time of Constantine to the time they died out. And just like the Chinese were misobsessed with the skies,
Stars as well,
so
yeah.
were the Mayans. And that's
And-
why they were misobsessed. They were trying to give themselves times to prepare for this object coming in.
It's a good point to make,
So they
Gil, is that the Mayans and the Chinese were obsessed. Let's make no mistake. They were fully obsessed about the skies. And there is, only one thing that explains the obsession. People think we're obsessed with the skies. I mean, look at all our technology. We're not exactly obsessed with the heavens. I mean, all hands were on deck in those days for the astronomy.
Sure.
They were an astronomy culture. It was all hands on deck.
What it was documented in the Chinese documents. If a astronomer was caught sleeping at his post, they had two astronomers after a large feast were caught sleeping at their post, and the guards misreported it to the emperor. He had their heads cut off because he wanted accurate information.
Wow.
Anything that happened in the skies, he wanted it documented. And so obviously he wasn't just using it to tell his horoscope, was he?
No.
There was something important that he felt he needed to know. And this is the reason why the elite want to know. It's the same reason why the elite today want to know.
Mm-hmm.
So they can gather the food they need for their own family members or their own government.
It explains all these seed vaults. It's not just the one in Norway. There's a couple of them dotted around the place.
Yes, yes. And if you, one thing a person has to do is connect the dots.
Yeah.
Now, after this event here is where, this is only around 960 so years ago that the Chinese, Korean, and Japanese astronomers saw it. This is well documented. You can see how they almost are in line. They saw this object for 26 months. 13 months coming in and 13 months leaving.
Wowzer.
You know. This is the picture that I took of a bronze bell. I spent 9 months in China.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
Remember how our Bible calls this the fiery dragon of old? Almost a lot of cultures call this a serpent, which is our object because it has a tail.
The tail of the comet, yeah.
Tail of a comet, they would call it a serpent because they didn't have. Right. Now take a look in the center right here. What's this? What we call this centerpiece right here. Doesn't that look like a planet with lightning coming off of it?
Mm-hmm.
Where did we hear lightning? Remember? Zeus and so on.
Yeah, it's like a plasma discharge.
Yeah. Now look at their globe here. That's where this helps them with their astronomy. They put the same dragons on each corner.
Wow. It's incredible.
So, and whenever we plotted it, this is what we came up with during the plot. And we even, it's included some of Europe's sightings. Europe's sightings are not as accurate as the Chinese because they wouldn't give us an elevation or near a certain star. They would pretty much at this time period and would say it was seen in the morning, in the early morning, rising. Or, you know, they would say if it would be near Jupiter or one of the planets, or if it's but hardly anything else. But one of the popes died in Rome on a death, and it was seen right here. And all of this lines up during that time period. Are you familiar with the Baxter tapestry?
It's Chinese again?
No, it's a very long tapestry. Matter of fact, this area right here is talking about Harold, the king.
Wow, this is new to me. Wow.
If you look at the top left here, you see where there's that word stellar. You see an object in front and you have debris behind it, like meteor showers.
Wow.
And yeah, that was in 1050.
1054. King Harold of England. I got to check this out. This is new to me. This is what I love doing shows, Gil, to find this information. The Baxter Tapestry.
Yeah, if you look up, it's extremely long tapestry that they made. It documents a good period of history. I don't know if this stellar is pertaining to his time or the time in between him and another king. I don't know. But you can look up wherever 1054 is.
Wow.
And now we get into the Dark Ages. This object passed twice at the beginning and towards the end of the Dark Ages. Now, what's interesting about this painting right here, they claim that this is Halley's Comet. Well, maybe one of them might be. Either that or it's the object entering and leaving.
In and out. It's like it's an in and out exit entry.
But one thing, Halley's doesn't give you a meteor shower that burns buildings.
No, it doesn't. It's just a little tiny streak in the sky.
Yeah, you can see where there's a fault in the ground where it opened up. You can see where the ground here was
fractured, yeah.
Uplifted.
Utter destruction. It's actually just showing catastrophe, utter destruction.
You can see where the trees are shattered in half. You can see where they're holding their stomach because they're probably a drought, hunger. So, doesn't this sound eerily familiar, what I've just called out in the Bible?
Yep.
Fiery hail, drought, earthquakes, the world is shaking. Yeah. Then later in Germany, there's this wood carving. You see two large objects. We know this one's the sun, but you see the people on the ground are pointing at this one like, what the heck is this?
Sure.
And it's slightly larger than the sun. Well, the moon and the sun are the equal size when you put them in the sky together. That's why you have like an eclipse. They're equal size. Why is this object bigger than the sun? And they're pointing at it. And it kind of shows almost like lightning coming off of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is what caused that had a lot to do with the Dark Ages. If you read some of the accounts of the Black Plague, some of the Black Plague is not Black Plague, period. Because the Black Plague was spread by rats, right?
Allegedly.
Well, and it was the fleas on the rats, supposedly. Well, we have a problem. It was documented that the Black Plague reached, I think, Iceland.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't have rats there, and they don't have fleas, and the Black Plague cannot handle cold weather.
Yeah. I know what you're going to say next. It's the cometary impact of the bacteria that's coming in space.
It's remember the tail I was telling you about?
Mm-hmm.
The reddish. There's a dust tail also.
Yeah, the red tail.
Some people went back through that. It described something almost similar. Remember the Hebrews, the Egyptians, when everything turned red, they had boils on their skin, and the animals had boils. Remember how the Black Plague created boils and sickness. Some people also believe that some of these meteors, depending on what they were made of, may have created a cyanide gas of some form, or ammonia, something that was very toxic to the people. Because some of these instances don't match the typical plague scenario. And matter of fact, even the account says it was like poisonous air. They even wrote it down.
Wow.
So do we take them as knowing what they're saying as truthful? I think we need to give them a little bit more credit, that they were living it, they were seeing it. So
Sure.
the Black Plague was there. But not all of these cases are Black Plague cases, because you can't have the plague in cold regions, and and a few other things. And it spread much quicker than fleas and rats can travel. So there's a problem with that too. If you look at the speed that it's traveling at, it's modern day computers can calculate the spread of a disease pretty good, and they can't duplicate it, not at the rate that they're showing it at certain times. So there's
Sure.
some of this stuff is not right, you know.
Yeah. Wow, sir. Where does all the
So
data point to, eh?
yep, we have two independent studies on the Chinese guest stars. We have two independent studies on the orbits of comets being warped. We have 3 NASA space probes that goes to one region of space, 14 scriptural events, and 5 secular events. And all of that, there's 88 constellations in viewed from Earth. All of that points to one, Sagittarius. Not just anywhere on Sagittarius, but on the ecliptic. It has to be on Earth's planetary plane for Earth to suffer 2 meteor showers. And we definitely have a problem here. And if you look at the present signs of the weather patterns, volcanic activity, earthquake, if we average the earthquakes for this last century on how many it was on the average per year,
Mm-hmm.
just a few months ago, we surpassed that in one day.
Yeah, I know. I know this year has been absolutely exponentially crazy for earthquakes, and people are ignoring it too. I mean, people don't get it. They just, oh well, the earthquake's not near me. It doesn't matter. That's usually what the lackluster approach is.
Yeah. Take a look at these earthquakes. The Bible says the earthquakes would be like the pains of a woman. This was from the USGS. They stopped showing this publicly. They stopped it in 2007.
Oh my God!
But if you went back and looked at it, this is where it is roughly today. Keep in mind, they're not reporting every earthquake anymore, neither. I had some friends of mine that were in Bulgaria, and they had a 3 or 4 there. The secretary of the group, she was almost thrown off the balcony. Her mom caught her belt and pulled her back. Otherwise, she was going to fall about 3 to 4 stories down to the street. And that wasn't even misreported on the USGS. And so not all of them are misreported right now. And look how high it is compared to where we used to be.
The graph
You're looking
is
at about it.
incredible. That it just speaks so much, Gil. That is incredible.
We're looking at an 800% increase. Well, look at these numbers. Now it's over 100,000 a year. 130,000, 140,000 a year we have. And it used to be only 4,500 in 1973.
Wow.
Keep in mind that this object entered our solar system around year 2000. It was on the edge of our solar system. It takes 16 years, according to Kepler's laws of planetary motion, from the orbit of Neptune to reach our sun. Volcanic activity, I'd say it's kind of high from this chart.
Yeah.
May give you another scenario for El Nino and La Nino. Remember, they kind of look at this because of the temperature of the oceans, the way it changes the currents. What about 3 million recently discovered underwater volcanoes?
Mm-hmm.
If our volcanoes are this active above ground, what do you think of the volcanoes that are under the ocean? Are they seeing the same level of activity? I would say so. And if the Pacific Rim, where all of this activity is going on, wouldn't that warm up our oceans and cause El Nino? I would say so. Tornadoes are getting to where they're off the charts.
Wow, the climate stuff is incredible.
Um, the droughts. You're going to see a major food shortage start soon when Hoover Dam goes dry. It's about to happen. This is the drought supposedly pertaining to the world. We have extreme weather pattern. You got some places that are having extreme rain and flooding, and other places that's not getting it at all.
Mm.
Then we got these large sinkholes. When I was young, you never even heard of these things. This is a modern term.
It's almost like sinkholes is commonplace now. It's just like it's in our pop culture, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. Look at the record breakers we've had in 1 month. Temperature highs and lows that were broken. How about bird and fish kills?
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Now, notice that this is where a lot of populated areas are. And a community, that means you can triple this probably to get a more accurate reading. Okay, because this is only where there's internet and picture taking and modern civilizations. Bird and sea life is very sensitive to methane. So when the earth is shaking, it's releasing the methane.
Ah,
And,
the
and this
methane
is,
release, that's also going to heat us up a little bit.
yep. So as the more the earth shakes, the more methane is released, and the more death is occurring between the bird and the sea. You've heard of canary in a coal mine, right?
Oh yeah, that's how they know if the miners are going to get it.
Exactly. Just because it just takes a small parts per million, and methane is odorless, and that bird's dead. Same thing with these fish. And a caribou. Look at the llamas at the bottom left here. 171,000.
Oh my God.
Alpaca were dead in Peru. 171,000. 200 dead reindeer here. 127,000 antelopes in Kazakhstan. 150 dolphins at the bottom here.
Wow.
Major deaths going on. Here's our magnetic north. It's moving 12 times its normal speed. Here's a chart that shows how quickly it's moving. Remember, certain airports are changing their numbers on their landing strip because their north reading is changing. At least in the U.S. it has.
Yeah, they're actually changing the runways. They have to. They have no choice. It's changed that much that they actually have to change the runways for the pilots.
Yep. I plotted, there's information that you can get that plots where the magnetic north has been throughout the centuries. And what I did was a plot where I have data that showed that this object passed through the system here. Then I did an average circle between all three of them. Then I took where we are today. Well, in 2015, we entered into this average circle. 2016, we're getting even deeper in there. But we're in the average of circle on where it passed in the past. In past history, this is, this we could use this as an indicator. It's close. And this brings us to the book of Revelation. And it was written on the island of Patmos. And I just wanted to show your audience that seal 6 scientifically matches this event right here. Seal 7 matches this event. Remember how it mentions a large meteor, this wormwood, the size of a mountain, hits Earth? Remember that large one that hit Earth that made the Gulf of Mexico? Where was it? It was on the second event. It's mentioned in Seal 7 that there's a large meteor the size of a mountain that's going to hit Earth right here. It's so, it hits Earth so large, Earth wobbles like a drunkard, like a hut in the wind. If you read, you see Isaiah right here, okay? So the earth is broken up, the earth is split asunder, the earth is violently shaken, the earth reels like a drunkard, it sways like a hut in the wind. That's a pretty descriptive.
Very descriptive, yeah.
Compared to what we know. Remember, he says in the end days, it'd be like the time of Noah. Now we know to what extreme is he talking about. It's the scientific event that he's talking about. Remember how it says the skies will roll away like a scroll? Right here in Revelation 14:15. Well, a meteor, when it makes an impact, will make a mushroom cloud just like a nuclear blast, if it's large enough, and it will, and the thermal cline as it's rising will cause the clouds to roll away just like a scroll. And that's what you're going to see when this fiery mountain hits the earth. When this big one hits, it's going to make a mushroom cloud like that. Small ones don't, but big ones do. And Earth is going to pass through the tail of this comet again. It's going to cause us to have a 12-hour delay on our rotation. And this is something that people need to get a grip of, because astronomers are going to predict the wrong half of the Earth, because it's a physicist model that says the tail is plasma, not the astronomy model. In other words, like if we were to try to calculate everything I showed you 15 years ago using the astronomy model, I couldn't make it work. It's only because of the physicist model I can make this work. And you need to, Earth, the average person who is not aware of this is only going to get a 40-day warning. This is when the government's going to tell you.
Well, 40 days is not much preparation, is it?
No, not when everybody's going to the store at the same time. If you ever been in a hurricane before, shelves are cleared out within 3 days.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's. They even talk about our electrical grid. If our electrical grid ever goes down, people are just going to flee and go to the stores, and they're not going to have any air conditioning. It's going to be a pandemic. Literally, it's going to be a pandemic within like days. Food supplies are like, everybody's hanging on them. Everybody is so dependent on food supplies in the store. How many people, what percentage of the population today, Gil, grows their own food? It's nearly,
correct.
It's nearly non-existent.
Very few.
Very few. Very few people grow, and a lot of people eat. So.
And then the people who are strong, like the military, are going to go and take your food if you have any extra. You know, the strong always picked on the weak. So that's kind of basically what's going on. Now, remember what I was saying, how we're going to go through the tail of the plasma?
Sure.
That means all generators worldwide have to shut down 3 days before its arrival. 3 days, the entire globe is in darkness. And there's not enough batteries in the world for people to use flashlights. Not enough batteries in the world. You got to go back to burn oil lamps again.
Wow.
Remember the statement of Luke in Luke 21 says, men's heart failed them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. I'd say so.
Oh, yeah. Wowzer.
I don't know if you want to make this for another point in another lecture, or if you want me to keep on, I can finish this. That's up to you.
What do you think, Gil? I mean, we're already
It's up
over
to
the.
you.
We're already. Well, how much more we got? I mean, I don't mind. It's up to you, brother. I mean, we're over the second hour that we planned anyway. We're definitely into the third hour now, but
Well,
yeah.
then
I mean,
let's finish it then.
let's finish it then. Let's go.
What gives me great concern is, as I showed you throughout the past, how accurate God was on what he was saying and what he was doing and what he was using. Okay? When we read Revelation 12:1, it stands out to me because I read it with astronomy eyes. It says, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and a moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Again, remember the time of Joseph. It's mentioning stars here. You can't see stars if the sun's out. So what would have been that word? It's illuminated body. It is the interpreter, because moon and stars are mentioned. He said, well, the only other object is the sun. And he's placing sun there. But I can point out to you that this is going to be, the illuminated body is our planet that it's talking about. Remember, during Joseph's time, the constellation with 11 stars is Leo, which I have right here. Leo is 11 stars. The 12th star is Jupiter. This is the crown over Virgo's head. The woman with the moon at her foot, is Virgo. Now, what's interesting is that, how did they pick this date 2,000 years ago? This was written on the island of Patmos roughly 2,000 years ago. I'm going to show you how, even if I was to give them the software that we have today and say, pick me this date, that they still couldn't do it. You see, a constellation right here shifts over every 2,100 years. During Passover, 2,000 years ago, this same time period, it would have been Libra right here, the scales of judgment. Okay. Now it's Virgo. Jupiter has an orbit of 11.7 years. The moon has an orbit of 29.5 days. But the tilt of the orbit is every 18 years for the tilt to get it to where it's under the foot of Virgo. Keep in mind that you have to have 3 to 4 decimal places to get it accurate, not just to the day, but to the hour we're talking about. Because this is at midnight from the viewpoint of Jerusalem, after a 12-hour delay in Earth's rotation.
Wow.
And keep in mind that there's a wild card. This planet has an unstable orbit. How could they have guessed it 5 passes later, the exact hour that it was going to come around, and for its tail to illuminate only Virgo, as the text says? Only Virgos illuminate. The sun illuminates all of these constellations. The text says Virgo is the only one illuminated. It's impossible for a human being 2,000 years to give us this date. This can only be done by a divine entity that placed the text in there, or the knowledge in there. It can't happen from human hands. Remember, they didn't have the zero yet. They didn't have decimal places yet, but yet they needed a decimal place of at least 3 to 4 to make the calculation correct. And they didn't have the planetary science yet to do this.
Sure.
And even if I handed them a software, they can't do it. This is what the software shows right here. If you look over here, I have to pick a position 180 degrees opposite of Jerusalem. That would put it in the middle of the Pacific, to compensate for a 12-hour rotational delay of Earth's rotation from the latitude of Jerusalem. What would they see at midnight? Remember, Yeshua comes mid of night, midnight. This is what you see. You see the tail of this object illuminating only Virgo, with the moon at the foot of Virgo, with a crown of 12 stars. This date greatly concerns me. That's March 26th, either 25th or 26th of 2016. It's, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't say that this is the exact date, but I'm going to say that this date greatly concerns me because it matches prior entry and exits of what's been established throughout the Bible.
Wow. Just for posterity, Gil, where does the wormwood name come from? Is that biblical as well, or I mean, we give it the modern name Planet X now and Planet 7X, but how old is the wormwood name? Where does that come from?
Wormwood is an asteroid that follows behind. That's part of the debris field. That hits us at the second event. The planet itself is called the fiery dragon of old.
Okay.
In the Bible, it's 2 separate items.
Gotcha.
2 separate. Remember that picture I showed you of wormwood in a museum. It's a meteor. It's an asteroid.
It's an actual.
We'll call it.
I got you.
And it says that it's going to be the size of a mountain, but that hits us at the second event. The planet is nowhere around. It's going back into deep space. We're just traveling 5 months later, and we're running into the second debris field. So this is the pivot point I was telling you about. When Earth tilts another 26, 28 degrees, somewhere around the Middle East right here is going to be the pivot point for the tilt. If you're 90 degrees from that tilt, this is the danger zone. All of South America, East Coast, Australia, Philippines, not a good place to be. If you look at this right here, if we tilt 26 to 28 degrees, then the Arctic Circle will come down to about Washington, D.C. All right.
Sure.
Well, if we look at nuclear facilities that are not designed for that type of weather, will will their cooling facilities freeze? Yes, probably so. The cooling on these nuclear power plants will probably freeze. And if it doesn't freeze, can they take a meteor shower? No. They cannot take a direct hit from a meteor. So I would definitely not want to live in this area right here, in southern Canada and in eastern and mid area of the U.S. Here now, just to prove that we've tilted before in the past.
His name is
Remember,
Dima. I think this little guy's name is Dima. Dima the elephant. This little guy. He has a nickname, Dima.
Dima?
I think that's his nickname. Yeah, they call him Dima. It's a Russian name. This is the little elephant from Siberia, Moscow.
Well, yeah, that's this is a woolly mammoth. Entire herds were frozen. And what's interesting is that they were frozen so quick, they didn't have time to swallow the food that they were munching on.
This is something scientists have never explained, and they just wash it they wash it away, or they put it under the carpet like it doesn't exist, this piece of information.
Well, remember where Siberia is. If Siberia was at the top of Earth when it was tilting, then the Arctic winds went right over them at 150-mile-an-hour winds or more, super cold winds. They froze instantly. They were flash frozen, they call that. And that's why they didn't have time to swallow. Remember, the Bible says 1/3 of the grass, 1/3 of the trees, and 1/3 of the rivers are destroyed or burned up. They didn't have a word for continental crust, but they're describing continental crust.
Mm-hmm.
So what half of the globe is 1/3 of the continental crust? Because only half of it goes through the debris field. The back half is shielded. Well, the Bible clearly described North and South America. North and South America is 1/3. Europe, Asia, and Africa is 2/3 of the continental crust. Scientists will predict Europe, Asia, and Africa to be the side that's going to be hit by the meteor shower. But they don't have a model that shows a 12-hour delay in rotation. There's only a biblical model. Therefore, the target zone is 1/3. Now, how can people 2,000 years ago accurately predict that?
Wow.
This is meteors that have hit the world here, that they have documented. If you add up all of this, this is over close to 35,000 meteor craters that have been documented. Now, what's interesting about it, they make no comment about the ones that didn't find. If you notice where the populated areas are, Europe and America, Australia, India, how dense the meteor impacts are. Do you think the meteors have a homing device that say, I'm only going to hit where it's populated areas? No.
Wow.
So if you were to cover the globe at this density of impacts, because these other areas, hardly anybody's living, okay, or has enough knowledge to pick out a meteor crater. And then look at the oceans. The oceans don't leave a crater. So there's 3 times more ocean area than their surface area of ocean than there is land. So if you covered all those areas at this density, does that tell you that we go through a debris field? That these are not single random events?
Far too
That
many.
these are meteor showers
Far too
or
many. Yeah.
storms that are actually hitting the Earth? The U.S. is going to be hit by a.
This is my major worry. You brought it up for my next question. Nuclear power has got to be so worrying. Look at Fukushima. It's a great example. Chernobyl. I mean, 2 nuclear disasters, but any sort of a cataclysm that rocks this Earth, whether this is going to be Planet X or anything else, the nuclear power stations are going to fail. They're going to crack open. It's going to be mayhem. It's why I don't like nuclear. It's the main reason I don't like nuclear. It doesn't.
Nuclear power should have never been built. There's other safer means of nuclear processes without plutonium or without these toxic waste. There's safe forms of nuclear that you can't make bombs out of. The only reason why you have nuclear power plants is because you want to make bombs. Okay, the way that they're doing it today. So any country that has a nuclear power plant using plutonium and all that, and guess what? They're making bombs, whether or not they're public or not. That's what they're using them for. I've seen the computer model. If La Palma Island goes, this is an island off the Canary Islands off of North Africa and south of Spain. There's this island that has a huge split. It's a volcanic island, and it's all it takes is an earthquake to shake it, and half that island is going to cascade into the Atlantic. The computer models show 9 tidal waves hitting the East Coast, Cuba, parts of South America. The first tidal wave is 90 foot tall, followed by progressively smaller ones, 9 more after that. Now, if Fukushima was destroyed by only a 30-foot tidal wave, we have 21 nuclear facilities along the East Coast that once the first tidal wave in, the other 9 is pushing that water deeper and deeper in. They estimate it could go at least 100 miles inland.
Wow.
They, according to the computer models that I saw, this is not YouTube videos, this is computer models that I've seen, that we'll have a 30-foot surge in the Gulf of Mexico throughout the Central America and where I live as well. I live about right here. I'm inside the crater rim.
Wow.
And we'll show you, if you add Yellowstone, we have 3 super volcanoes here, not just one. Everybody talks about Yellowstone, but we have 3. The Long Valley caldera, and I think Crater Lake is the 3rd one. I'm not sure about that. But Yellowstone is the biggest in the world. You see these lines? These are the ash-covered areas that this thing's going to cover, somewhere around these areas. This is what it covered in its past. And if you put a 100-mile circle or so, 75-mile circle around every nuclear power plant, if we have a meteor shower that hits this side of the Earth, it's not going to look pretty. The Bible says no one will live here for 1,000 years. I would say so. This is the area. This is one of the areas that it's talking about in the Bible, that no one would live here for 1,000 years. It's going to be set as an example. When you ignore the Word of God as severely as the United States and Canada has done, there's a reckoning to be happen. This is something that Amos said right here. And it shall be that day declared the Master Yahweh, that I shall cause the sun to go down at noon, and shall darken the earth on a day of its brightness. Remember I was telling you that Earth's rotation was slowed down by 12 hours?
Wow.
And it shall darken the earth on a day of its brightness. And it shall cause the sun to go down at noon, instead 6 hours off, because the earth's rotation is turning. The sun will go down at noon. Jerusalem will be the safe side. It'll be on this side. This side of the half of the earth is going to be hit by a meteor shower. And this pretty much a lot of people don't realize it because they don't study the details close enough.
Sure.
There's two taking aways in the Bible, not just one. And the book of Revelation has a blessing and a curse with it. He says, if you read it and understand it, you're blessed. If you change it, you're cursed. If you take away a word or add a word. Now, keep in mind, we're reading from a translated copy. I'm pointing out possible translational errors, and I give you both meanings. It could mean sun, or it can mean our planet. I'll let you choose. But sun is not correct. Now, I'm going to show you where some pastors have changed a few words and where they're cursed. One of the taking aways, which is this first one right here where I'm pointing at, this taking away is different from this taking away over here, where the dead are first and the living are taken up and they go to heaven. Okay? This is called the day that no man knows the day or the hour, because our time is screwed up when we're living in it. We can count it on a calendar today, but we won't know it when we're living it. Because remember the first event right here? We lost 12 hours in its rotation. Now noon is midnight, midnight is noon. What do you call that next day? And when does it start?
Mm-hmm.
When we hit 5 months later by the second event, by the fiery mountain, we're hit so hard where Earth is moved inward slightly, and our day becomes 364-day year, Enoch's calendar. So he says we won't know the day or the hour. He didn't say we won't know the week or the month, but we won't. Well, when we're living in it, we won't know this day. Even though in Hebrew we know it's the beginning of the 7th month, because that's called there's a Hebrewism. This is the day that no man knows the day or the hour. But in this particular incident, when we're living in it, we won't be able to find that day. Even Yeshua doesn't know that. He says only the Father knows. Okay. This date right here is qualified different. This is also a taking away. He says a remnant is taken to the wilderness, and they have to meet the groom on Mount Zion in Jerusalem. So this one is totally defined different, this taking away, than this one over here. And people tend to blend them together. And some pastors have said remnant means the entire body of the church. No, it doesn't. Not in Hebrew, not in any language. Wilderness, they say, means heaven. No, it doesn't. Not in Hebrew, nor does it mean that in any other language. That's what you call changing words to mean something that it's not. It cannot even be translated into any language to mean that. Those people that believe that are cursed. They're saying right here for this meteor shower, don't worry, you're going to be raptured to heaven. And that's not what it says. The people who believe that are cursed because they changed the meaning of what it actually said. Mm-hmm. You have to have a point. Remember I taught you what a mikra is? There's a rehearsal.
The mikra, yeah.
This rehearsal requires you to be in Jerusalem at Mount Zion. Matter of fact, you can read Joel, Joel, 2nd chapter, verse 30 to 32. It defines everything there for you. Mm-hmm. 30 and 31 says it's the end of days and that there's a double eclipse. Double eclipse means our planet is there. Okay? The last line, verse 32, says, for there will be an escape in Jerusalem on Mount Zion for a remnant brought to a place of safety. He's telling you this remnant has to meet him in Jerusalem on Mount Zion on that appointed day and time. It's a mikra. The bride has to be home. The groom is picking up the bride. Her home is the old Jerusalem. Her new home is the new Jerusalem. But in a Hebrew wedding, before she can go to her new home, she's brought to a what's it called? A bridal chamber, where she prepares herself before the wedding. The wilderness is the bridal chamber where she prepares herself before she goes to the wedding. And she prepares herself for 3.5 years before she enters heaven. The dead are first and then the living. And people are missing this in the scriptures here. That's why the parable of the 10 virgins is so important to grasp. This is another point that was impossible for them to pick. 2000. Remember I told you this is March 25th or 26th, where this symbol in the sky happens.
Sure.
That's exactly 3.5 days earlier than that is the Feast of Passover on a full moon. Why is that important? Remember where the two prophets, they prophesied 1,260 days, then they're dead 3.5? The root word to prophesy means to profess, to speak. They can't speak if they're dead for 3.5. So how many days are there on earth? 3.5 days longer. They're 1,263.5 days. Well, that shows us that they're ahead of the bride and the bridemaid going into the wilderness, because they're only in the wilderness only 1,260 days. That means Elijah comes on the Feast of Passover, right here, on a full moon. We get to be with the two witnesses for 3.5 days before the Messiah comes. The job of Elijah is to announce the groom is coming. Mid of week, mid of night. See, the bridesmaids, you can tell the difference between a bride and a bridesmaid. The bridesmaids carried lamps because it's a night procession for a Hebrew wedding. He comes mid of night to pick up his bride. The bridesmaids carried the lamps lighting the procession at night. There's 5 foolish and 5 wise. They're literal oil lamps. What makes those wise wise and the foolish foolish? The foolish only have oil in their lamp. The wise have an extra portion of oil besides the oil in their lamps. The oil in the lamp is supposed to burn for 12 hours. After the first 12 hours of burning, the foolish are out of oil. The wise are trimming their wicks and refilling their oil. The foolish asked the wise for oil. They said, no, we don't have enough. Go back to town and get you some. And then as they're trimming and lighting, a shout goes out saying the groom is here. Only the wise go out to meet the groom. Remember, they have 2 portions of oil. Each portion is 12 hours. Remember what I said? The night is going to be 12 hours longer on the Jerusalem side.
Mm-hmm.
On the U.S. side, it'd be 12 extra hours of daylight because there's a 12-hour delay in rotation. The wise understand this, and they get 2 portions of oil. This is literal oil. Remember I said there's not enough batteries in the world for everybody to have batteries.
Mm-hmm.
This is olive oil.
Mm-hmm.
And they make it to the place of safety where they're protected for 3.5 years during this time of the Great Tribulation. He says, if you make it to the end without being in this place of protection, he says, count yourself lucky. Very few of you will make it to the end unless you're in this place of protection. Now we can date a few things possibly. If this March 26th is the actual date, and remember, we have to see it before we can verify it,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no valid pictures of our planet yet. 40 days earlier is Jonah's warning. That's February 15th, 2016.
Sure.
We can go from this date into the 1,260 days. This is the day of resurrection and rapture. We can count backwards from this date, which Daniel says, if you make it to the end, 1,335 days. From where? From when you see the Antichrist make the peace agreement. Well, that gives you January 11th. Then he will break it at 1,290 days, Daniel says. All right? That's broken right here, July 24th, 2019. That gives you a 45-day of war before the day of resurrection and rapture. A remnant is pushed to the Negev desert. 3/4 of Israel is conquered. There's a group that's pushed a small group that's pushed to the Negev desert. The Muslims are about ready to wipe them out. This is when the 2 prophets die. That's when the Muslims stop and celebrate. They're giving gifts to each other because the 2 prophets are dead now. That's what saves the remnant in the desert. Is because the 2 prophets are dead. Then he resurrects them before Muslims are wiping them out.
Wow.
And then this is the overall chart right here of the timeline.
Wowza.
Y'all able to download all of these charts for free.
Tell us where we can get that at. This is the important part, Gil, because there's a lot of background information here, and I know you've provided a wealth of different content. Give us the website as well as the YouTube channel where people can either download the charts, and also there's a free ebook, I believe.
Yes, my website is not up to date, really. It's a gentleman from England that started it, but I never had enough time to go in there and work on it. So most of my work is on YouTube. And if you look underneath the videos, there's a Dropbox link. And that brings you to all of my reference material, the free ebook with all of the charts in it, and everything you really need and it's all given to y'all free.
Sure.
to
Well,
where
I'm
y'all
also
can do your own research.
indeed, and I'm going to link that up as well. I'm going to just probably copy and paste the YouTube description you have as well, so that people can grab the Dropbox links there too. But yeah, planet7x.com and Planet7x on YouTube as well. Gail, I really, really thank you for your time today. I know that was a lot of information to get through, and you're a warrior. You definitely have plowed through a lot of information there. I like your methodology, and I like you're quite tenacious, and you've kept to the logical, detailed facts as best you can, and applying the science and the data that we know of as today. Very indicative with the astronomy, the geological data, the historical accounts, the references, biblical and otherwise. It seems to all gel. I mean, the climatic data, it's mind blowing. It really is, Gil. But
We we definitely have a problem. It's a real object. It's just a when is it going to return? Keep your eyes out and look for it. If it's going to be this year, this Jubilee, which is this next year, then that means we will see it this December.
Sure. Well, I'm going to leave it at that, Gil, unless you got any final comments. I really thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, let me just leave on this note. There's a gentleman in California that made a documentary on my findings, and his DVD will probably be out in one more week. So if people want to see the documentary that goes through these findings and get a DVD, this gentleman is going to have one for sale.
Sure.
He's going to put up. So, and that's it.
Okay, bro. Well, listen, again, that was a long show for me. That's got to be my longest show to date, but I enjoyed every minute of it, and I enjoy your company, Gil. We're going to talk to you in the not-too-distant future, I hope. For now, we're going to go and get a tea break, a well-earned tea break. But, Gil, I thank you again, brother, and we'll speak to you in the not-too-distant future.
All right. Sounds good. Bye-bye.
Okay, I've stopped the stream, Gil.
Data to back up that there has been a large object that has passed through our solar system.
This is the thing, Gil, that has my attention too, because there's definitely data. There's definitely data out there, and as people like yourself out there have taken this research really into the forefront. There's a lot of data out there that people can easily get their hands on. That, like you say, the Chinese records, they were mapping astronomy and supernovas and all sorts of material going back thousands of years. They're the only civilization to be permanently in existence for 5,000 years. All the rest have either come and gone. But great that the Chinese records are there to do this research. I'll open the floor, I guess, if you want to start with the presentation. I'll let you just. I'm going to kill the video, Bill, and what we'll do then is we'll hand it over to you.
All right. Do you hear me clearly? Because I'm hearing you kind of garbled.
Yeah, no, I'm loud. We're loud and clear, Gil. You're coming in loud and clear.
Okay, because the internet on this side is a little bit slow here.
Okay, well, it's going to be a lot better with the video now, so anytime you're ready, we can go with the presentation. I'm going to strap in for this one, Gil. I'm not going to bother you too much. I'll just maybe pass the odd comment, but I'm going to give you the floor space to get through this.
All right, I'm going to give you my basic presentation when I've given this to audience. Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah, looks loud and clear. Planet 7X timeline of events.
All right. This is the timeline that I've come up with my research, where it's passed in our past history here. And there's 14 biblical events all the way up to Yeshua's sacrifice. And then we have 5 or 6 secular events. Whenever we get to the dark ages, data is extremely kind of mysteriously is missing. Only thing we have is some wood carvings and paintings. But according to the science paper that I'm reading on, it says that it appears as if the religious authorities at the time, which was basically the government, did censoring of this object. And keep in mind, the scientists at this time were looking for the evidence of a supernova. Didn't know that it was a NEO at the time. So what we'll do right here is we'll show the relationship with Noah's flood. Okay. Let's see here. Okay, this is Noah's flood. It mentions in Genesis that the floods started, and it took 40 days and 40 nights for it to rain. Then 150 days later is when the water started to recede, and that a great wind passed over the water that caused. Then he saw the water receding. Well, that great wind, when I was looking at this, that possibly Earth traveled through two debris fields. One that broke the canopy of water in the first one, and the second one, a large meteor hit the Earth that removed 71% of our top crust. And the meteor crater that was caused by the meteor was the Gulf of Mexico. Let me show you this example here on how this may have happened. We had a canopy of water. Remember, the Bible talks about right here, this is where a lot of people ask me a question, especially when I say the 71% of the crust. You see how I showed that there's extra crust right here? You can see how Pangea is held tightly. Held tightly together. Okay. The meteor shower ruptured the canopy of water, causing the Earth to be flooded. Then we had a large impact here that caused the Gulf of Mexico, knocking off 71% of our crust. That caused a debris field around Earth that later coalesced into a moon. You can see right here in this drawing how Pangea had fit together here.
Clearly.
And roughly 300 to 400 years later is what it took for a moon to coalesce into a moon as we see it today. The moon is equal to the volume of the missing crust. Now, this is also the volume of our oceans. You see? So if you look at this a little bit closer and you dissect the Earth and you show how it hit and it causes a pressure wave, and part of the pressure wave will push the core upward, and the other one, the pressure wave will bounce off and come at an angle. You see this white mark right here? That's the Himalayas.
Wow.
See this purple? This purple right here is the pressure wave. Well, let's see if we have any data to that. And let me show you the Gulf of Mexico first.
Gotcha.
You see how we have
perfect.
How Africa came right off the shelf here.
Gotcha. Snugly fits in.
Okay.
It's quite snug.
Yep. You see how Cuba fits in here? They had a string of lakes where it caused it to break away.
Gotcha, yeah.
Okay. All right. And then you see how the Yucatan
got a big hole in the middle of it.
Right. Wow. You see this, how it split right in here? There's a natural split that took place.
Yeah, you can see it.
And whenever you bring back the Yucatan, and I can prove that this is the original spot for it in one of the other slides. But take a note right here. You see how there's a lake that's cut in half in Florida?
Yep.
A large crater has one of the characteristics of a large crater is a double rim. There's a rim where the edge of Florida is here. There's a rim on the outskirts in the Gulf of Mexico. And this outer rim goes right underneath half of our state, and it meets right where Toledo Bend Dam is, because that's the edge of the crater, and it goes north of Houston and everything. Let me show you a little bit more here. This is how large the crater would have been. Because this happened at the time the Earth was flooded, the crater is not as pronounced, because that wall of water would have helped compress the rim down. Okay, and we can tell the size of the meteor that it took to make this hole. Keep in mind, the Gulf of Mexico is its average depth is greater than the average depth of the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, and the meteor size for 1,100-mile wide crater would be roughly 110 miles across. I don't have the stats to break that down in kilometers for your listeners, but they can do the math there.
Well, I'm still in the UK. We're still on the miles as well. We're refusing to go to kilometers, Gil.
Oh, okay. All right, good.
Yeah.
Now, take a look at this mountain range that goes below here. You see how it follows the curve?
Oh, yeah, it's like a double
The mountain,
rim. You can
mountain range.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. It there's definitely some characteristics, and there's one of the things that's stopping the scientists from believing that that's a crater, but I'll get to that later. Now we're going to talk about the Himalayas, okay? You can see the curved shape of it. It has a semicircle shape. And what I'm saying is this is created in seconds, not thousands of years. You see, this is a gravity map from NASA right here. Okay, you're slightly heavier in Asia than any other spot on the Earth. And they can't figure out why. You see how this circular reddish area is? Then it goes across the Himalayas right in here.
Wow.
Well, that's where the pressure wave hit from underneath. The reason why you're heavier there is because it compacted the matter. The crust was compacted from underneath.
Oh, yeah. It's like a reverse impact.
From additional meteor showers. These are not random, but this is meteor showers that it's actually protected. It ran interference for us when Earth went through the tail, and I believe I know one of the cases that it passed.
Wow.
Now this is a drawing. I think it came from NASA or someone. It shows how the Earth is the moon is pieced together, very large pieces. Just like it would have coalesced when it came off of the Earth. Okay.
Wow.
Let me run a little video real quickly for you to see what I'm saying here. This is something that I made here. This is the meteor coming in.
See it now, yeah.
Next to the Gulf of Mexico. This is the pressure wave.
Gotcha.
And it's snapping the crust in not in one piece, but it was in multiple pieces.
Yeah. Scattering.
And then but this happened when the Earth was flooded. That's the only thing I can't show.
Yeah.
And part of this meteor was probably sticking out still in space.
Incredible.
Between the flooding of the Earth and this impact is what destroyed most of the dinosaurs. And this is why the Earth is cracked like an egg.
Yeah, there's fractures. I know. I've always wondered about the fractures, like the Mid-Atlantic Ridge in the off the west coast of Ireland here where I'm at, and it's just there's a massive fracture that runs down right through the Atlantic, North Atlantic and South Atlantic.
Right here, this one, in there.
That's the one, yeah.
Yep. And the only way that the Earth is fractured at this amount. Remember, if we had Pangea, remember, if Earth is molten, why would all the continental crust bunch up if Earth is spinning and it's molten?
Mm.
If it's spinning and molten, it would have spread evenly across the surface.
Mm.
So Pangaea was formed because it was landlocked by the other land. You only had seas and lakes. You didn't have oceans yet. And this is to give you, for instance, on size of craters. This is Meteor Crater.
In Arizona, yeah.
That's that dot. Yeah, you see that dot in that picture right there? That's Meteor
Wow.
Crater. That's a mile across.
Wow, it's tiny.
This one right here is called the Chesapeake Bay Crater. It's 53 miles across. Then the Chicxulub Crater, which is on the Yucatan Peninsula, which they thought killed the dinosaurs. That's the large one in this circle right here.
Wow.
Well, if we look at how large this is, it's a dot right here, this yellow circle. It's only 1/10 of the size of the large one right here.
Oh wow! So that's the
And
Yucatan.
Yeah, and a large crater has a double rim, and that's what we have here. We have a double rim.
Wow.
Now, this is where I want to show you some evidence. You see these cenotes, they call them. Cenotes is a limestone.
Yeah.
It's a limestone formation, a cave-like object. It's when the meteor hits, it liquefies the limestone like into a mud type of consistency. The water turns to steam, and then you get a steam bubble that comes up, making a perfectly round opening. Okay, a circular opening. That's all of these blue dots, or
cenotes.
Right.
Wow.
Now they said this area right here that I'm marking out is evidence for the Yucatan impact that supposedly killed the dinosaurs. Okay, this one. Well, my question is, what made these larger ones right here? See how wide that rim is compared to how narrow this one is?
It's like a field.
Right.
Hi, Gil. Great to see you and great to connect with you tonight.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and I really thank you for your time. I know we had a little bit of planning to get this one organized. Here we are, Gil. We're going to be talking about Planet X. What is, there's almost like a hysteria out there, Gil, where people are looking for answers on this. People really are searching for the truth. We definitely have something there, Gil. There's something tangible to this whole thing. There's fragments of evidence, and I know we're going to get through a long presentation today, so I'm going to open the floor for that, and just tell me how you first of all got into this research and what we're going to start with the presentation today.
Well, I first started this research as a skeptic pertaining this about Planet X, and I decided to spend a little time. I had a little extra time to do some research into it to see if I could either disprove it or prove it. And most of the information I saw on the general web was they didn't have any actual data to back it up. It was based on circular reasoning. And that didn't fit well with me as far as it being a valid object or had any validity of being a threat to us. And so I decided to take a look at the Chinese records because they go back the furthest in time on documenting objects in our sky, and they have the most extensive records. And I came across this white paper, this report called the Reevaluation of the Supernova of 1054. It was produced by the Dublin Institute of Advanced Studies. And I'll show a frontal view of the paper itself in a little while. And what that proved out is that the supernova came 2 or 3 months earlier, and that this object that they documented for 26 months was actually an unknown NEO, a near-Earth object, a sizable object that was reported in the thing document as at one point it was as bright as Venus and as large as Jupiter.
Wow.
And they had other points in that they had the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Korean astronomers documented it so well that I decided to take an attempt to plot its orbit.
Mm-hmm.
And to my surprise, it matched a biblical time frame of 150 days on a separation between its entry and exit. And the other startling point of this was that it was on Earth's planetary plane. Both of its legs, entry and exit, it crossed Earth's planetary plane twice.
Mm-hmm.
That is an oddity in itself. And since this was an unknown object, a sizable size, it piqued my interest, especially since it matched biblical time period.
Mm-hmm.
In the book of Revelation, it mentions another time period of 5 months, which is the equivalent to 150 days as well. So I used that model, which the model we came up with was that it was closer to 360 year orbit, not a 3,600 year orbit. And we used that, and I went back to the biblical records to see what other time periods that it may have been documented in.
Mm-hmm.
And I found 14 of them.
Wow.
14 periods of times, and 5 secular. It brings us to the present, where there's a high probability that it may pass back around here in year 2016 or 17. And that's what brought me out of being a skeptic into because now we have,
impact.
Yeah, you have denser matter, you have your gravity is greater. And it's happened to push up the Himalayas where the crust was the weakest. And it came in a semicircle. And now we know why we're heavier here. And this purple, this reddish mark right here, matches the pressure wave that I showed you earlier.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the
diameter
match. Now this also helps explain some of the anomalies we have in Earth throughout the Earth. One of them, you may recognize this as Ayers Rock in Australia.
I was going to ask.
You can see the towns. Yeah, you can see the towns here,
mm-hmm.
right here.
Oh yeah.
This is how. See these scars on there? You can see that it had a rough ride. Let's say, it's scarred with longitudinal marks.
Yeah, very long striations.
Right. Well, I have a theory that this is called I think it's a monolith, they call it. This is the second largest in Australia. And this is a puzzle because it's not native to the area. It landed here very softly. It didn't come from outer space because it's not burnt. So it didn't re-enter the atmosphere.
Wow.
And it didn't land with any force.
Wow.
It had a soft landing. Otherwise, there'd be a crater here.
Yeah.
So that's what the mystery is right here. How did it get there?
There's no tektites, there's no nuclear heating from the friction of the atmosphere, and there's no impact.
Correct.
Wow.
Well, I have an idea that it came at a very slight angle from where the Himalayas were pushed up, that this rock was tossed from the Himalayas when Australia was closer to the continent of India. And that it came at an angle, just like you throw a rock on top of a lake and you skip it, and then it finally loses energy and it just lands softly.
Gotcha.
Well, you see these marks right here? That's about 13 miles away, right here. That it landed prior to the where it's at today.
Mm-hmm.
So if we put Ayers Rock right here, take a look at this. Tell me if we have a possible match on the skids. on the skid marks,
Wow.
and that it landed here, and this is where it lost most of its energy. It flipped a couple of times and landed softly. That's why we don't have a crater. So Ayers Rock originally came from the Himalayas.
Amazing.
This is the direction that the skid marks, and Australia was closer to India. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the moon here, just to prove out this one, because this is the basis. If we can prove this out here, then that tells us that this. I'm going to show you a logic triangle at the end of this that is very hard to beat. This is the moon, and you see all this dark area?
Mm-hmm.
These
Very
are
dark.
canyons.
Mm.
Yeah, these are canyons. These are not craters. These are canyons. And let me show you the size of them, okay? This is where, debris did not fill in when it was forming.
Gotcha.
So here's the U.S., roughly 2,000 miles across. If we place this is the Grand Canyon, this little blue mark right in here.
Mm-hmm.
And if we compare the Grand Canyon against the moon canyons, you can see, remember, the moon is, this is scaled to size.
Yeah.
The moon is only about a quarter of the diameter of Earth. You can see how large these craters are. I mean, these canyons. This is where material did not fill in. Now, this side always faces the Earth because it's heavy in iron, and it points to us like a compass needle.
Yeah, it's locked in there, yeah.
Right. Now, the back side of the moon has 4 times more craters than the side facing us. At some given point in its past, it's actually protected Earth